The Earl of Clancarty.
My Lords, it is with much pleasure that I'm introducing this debate this evening about unidentified flying objects, known more briefly as UFOs and sometimes as flying saucers. I understand that this is the first time that the subject of UFOs has been debated in your Lordship's chamber. So this is indeed a unique occasion. Before proceeding further, I think that I should declare an interest in that I have written a number of books about the UFOs. I am very grateful to those noble lords that are going to speak after me in this debate. It will be, I am sure, a most stimulating discussion. Before speaking about the need for an inter-governmental study of UFOs, which is the basis of my motion to be debated today, I think it advisable to give your lordships some background to this fascinating subject of the UFOs. So I'm going to briefly cover a little history, the classes of witnesses, the characteristics of UFOs, some important sightings, and then deal with the vital subject of the attitude of governments to this important phenomenon. Although UFOs have come to the fore since the end of the last World War, there are reports of them all through history. Among the papers of the late Professor Alberto Tulli, former director of the Egyptian Museum at the Vatican, was found one of the earliest known records of a fleet of flying saucers written on papyrus long, long ago in ancient Egypt, actually in the time of Thutmose III, circa 1504 to 1450 BC, who with his army witnessed the sighting of what we today would call UFOs. Now, I'm not going to bore your lordships with accounts of UFOs in every century, because I want to get on to the very interesting things happening today. In modern times, things began to happen during World War II, when both Allied and German planes saw strange circular lights around their planes. We called them Foo Fighters, FOO. Both Allied and German pilots thought that they were secret weapons of the other side. After the war, on the 24th of June, 1947, an American called Kenneth Arnold, piloting his own plane, was on a mercy mission trying to find another aircraft that had crashed somewhere in the Cascade Mountains in the state of Washington. Suddenly he spotted 9 gleaming objects, crescent-shaped, flying in a zigzag fashion between his plane and the mountains. He managed to calculate their speed because he was able to get a fix, I think that is a technical term, between 2 mountain peaks, Mounts Rainier and Baker. It appeared they were doing some 1,400 miles per hour, a very fast speed in 1947. Sometime after landing, Arnold, in answer to a question from the press, described the motion of the flying objects as being like saucers skimming over water. Next day, the press headlined them as flying saucers. Since Arnold's sighting in 1947, millions of people all over the world have seen the UFOs. This brings me to the class of witnesses that see UFOs. It is true that occasionally you'll get the odd crank or hoaxer, but the majority of witnesses are sincere people. Then again, many witnesses are pilots, police officers, coast guards, radar operators, in short, trained observers. Many astronauts have seen the UFOs. Many people ask me, why is it that astronomers don't see them? The answer, my lords, is that they do. In a letter published in the Daily Telegraph on the 4th of January last year, I listed 8 well-known astronomers that had seen UFOs, including Dr. Clyde Tombaugh, discoverer of the planet Pluto. Now for a few words about the UFOs themselves. Actually, the name flying saucer, given by the press in 1947, was a misnomer, as they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes: cigar, oval, disc, sphere, donut, crescent, tadpole-shaped, you name it, the list is endless. A few words about their characteristics. UFOs often have very bright lights, and sometimes when in flight change colours all the way through the colour spectrum. Sometimes the light from a UFO is so intense that its shape is obscured from view. This light energy is so powerful that witnesses have been burnt on the face and hands if in too close a proximity to a UFO. Another characteristic of the UFOs is electrical interference with various machines. UFOs have been notorious for stopping cars at short range. The driver will hear his engine splutter and it stops running. Besides cars, many other machines have been affected, including aircraft, motorcycles, buses, lorries, tractors, and the UFOs are said to be the cause of some of the power blackouts in the USA, Mexico, and other countries. Indeed, UFOs have been seen flying along power lines in the USA just before blackouts. And furthermore, I have a picture on the wall of my study at home of a UFO doing just that. Now I will mention one or two of the more impressive sightings since the war. On the 29th of June, 1954, a BOAC Boeing strata cruiser, Centaurus, had taken off from New York for London. Dinner had been served. The time was just after sunset when the skipper, Captain James Hard, first sighted the UFOs. Some of the passengers by then were asleep. There was one big object with 6 smaller ones. Captain Howard pointed them out to his co-pilot, First Officer Lee Boyd, who flew with the famous Pathfinder force in World War II. The objects were 5 miles from the Centaurus. They stayed parallel with the aircraft for 80 miles. From time to time, the big object changed its shape. The radio officer checked with Goose Bay, Labrador, to see if any other aircraft were in the area, and was told no. Goose Bay sent up a fighter to investigate. All the crew saw the objects. Just before the fighter appeared, the objects began to disappear, and it seemed that the smaller ones went inside the large one. Altogether, a crew of 8 and 14 of the 51 passengers saw the UFOs. In November 1975, at Strategic Air Command bases in Michigan, Montana, North Dakota, and Maine, a number of UFOs were sighted over a 13-day period. Several were hovering near nuclear weapons storage areas. When interceptor planes were sent up to investigate, the UFOs dimmed their lights and became invisible. One of the most amazing UFO incidents ever occurred in September 1976. A report of this event, written by Geoffrey Levy, appeared in the Daily Express on the 27th of February last year. I will try and give you his account in my own words. A very large glowing object was seen over Tehran, Iran. Hundreds of witnesses telephoned the authorities. At 1:30 a.m., the Royal Iranian Air Force scrambled a Phantom jet to investigate the UFO, which was some 70 miles away. As the jet reached about half the distance to the UFO, all of the Iranian planes' communications and instrument systems malfunctioned. The pilot had no alternative but to return to base. The second Phantom jet took off, flying faster than the speed of sound. The UFO began to move at a very fast speed indeed and soon outpaced the jet. Then an extraordinary thing happened. Suddenly a second, smaller UFO came out of the big one and headed straight for the jet. The jet pilot tried to release an AIM-9 air-to-air missile at the glowing object, with no success at all. The weapons control panel was not working and all electronic systems were out of action. There was only one thing for the pilot to do, and that was to make his escape. He put his plane into a dive. Then an extraordinary thing happened. The second UFO turned around and went back inside what we might call the mothership. The jet pilot's instruments started working again, so once more he tried to pursue the UFO, but it moved away too rapidly, and so he returned to base. There are literally vast numbers of these astounding reports. My lords, this worldwide UFO invasion of every country's airspace is of growing importance, and therefore I suggest that Parliament keeps a continuous watch on the situation. I have thought of one way of doing this. In the same way that there is a House of Lords Defence Study Group, ably chaired by the noble Lord Shinwell, perhaps we could have a House of Lords UFO Study Group to meet periodically. If any of your lordships are interested, please let me know. Now I would like to touch upon the attitude of governments towards this subject and to stress the need for an intra-governmental study, which is the object of my motion this evening. I'm only going to talk about 4 governments, you'll probably be pleased to know. First of all, let us take a look at the United States. I think that one of the reasons for playing down UFOs some years ago in the United States was fear of panic among the public. This was partly based, as you will recall, on an actual panic that did occur back in 1938 due to a very realistic broadcast by Orson Welles of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds. Thousands of people left their homes. However, for a time after the war, the United States Air Force investigated pilots' reports without any debunking. Then the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, stepped in. The CIA controls the intelligence departments of the United States military services. They ordered the US Air Force to clamp down on all UFO reports. It was in 1953, I think, that this happened, and has been going on ever since. Pilots who reported seeing UFOs were ridiculed, and after a time, other pilots did not report them for fear of their reputations being damaged. We had high hopes during President Carter's campaign that there was a strong possibility of a breakthrough to the truth about UFOs. He disclosed during his campaign that he had seen a UFO a few years previously in Georgia, and added that if he got into the White House, he would release to the public all the UFO information in the Pentagon. Unfortunately, that election pledge has not yet been fulfilled. What has been happening in the Soviet Union? Probably the leading ufologist in that country is Dr. Felix Ziegel, professor of higher mathematics and astronomy at the Moscow Aeronautical Institute. For a long time, he'd been trying to form a big UFO research group on a worldwide scale. Many UFOs had been seen over the Soviet Union. In July, August, September, and October 1967, for instance, giant spaceships were seen over various parts of the USSR by astronomers and other witnesses. On the 10th of November that year, it was announced that there was to be a full investigation of UFOs. This was announced on Russian television. The operation was to be headed by Major General Anatoly Stolyarov, with Dr. Siegel as number 2. Thousands of UFO cases were to be analyzed by scientists and Soviet Air Force officers. However, the Russian Academy for Sciences came down hard on the new UFO group, and on the 27th of February 1968, Pravda published the official attitude of the authorities, and the cover-up was on. However, there is one country which can be relied upon to take an independent line from others over many matters, and UFOs proved to be no exception. In February 1974, the then French Minister of Defense, Monsieur Robert Gallet, was interviewed entirely about the UFOs on France Inter radio station. The interviewer was Jean-Claude Bourret. At the time in France there was tremendous publicity, but for some reason our newspapers did not even mention the broadcast. Monsieur Gallet stated that the UFOs were real, but admitted that it was not known where they came from. He said that there had been a unit in the French Ministry of Defense since 1954 collecting UFO reports. Some of this material was sent on to the National Center for Space Studies in Toulouse, the French equivalent of the American NASA. In this center there was also a unit, a scientific one, studying both UFO sighting and landing reports. A little over a year ago, I received some information that this particular unit was under government sponsorship, so I put down a question for written answer. The noble Lord Donaldson of Kingsbridge, kindly confirmed to me in his reply that the unit, GPAN, those are the initials of the group, had been set up under the French Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Artisans at the centre in Toulouse. Monsieur Gallet also added that the gendarmerie were playing a very important part in UFO investigations, questioning witnesses and examining burnt circular marks on the ground where UFOs were alleged to have landed. So the French have been taking it all seriously, keeping their own people informed. Nobody panicked, and people did not rush like lemmings into the sea. Is it not time that Her Majesty's government informed our people what it knows about UFOs? The UFOs have been coming in increasing numbers now for 30 years since the war, and I think it is time our people were told the truth. We have not been invaded from outer space. Most incidents have not been hostile. Indeed, it is us, Earthlings, that have fired on them. There may have been a few allegedly hostile incidents, but I maintain that if there is a disturbing element in a phenomenon which is pretty friendly on the whole, that we should be told the truth. Whatever the truth is, I am sure that an informed public is a prepared one. Another thing, it is on record that both sighting and landing reports are increasing all the time. Just suppose the UFOnauts decided to make mass landings tomorrow in this country. There could well be panic here because our people have not been prepared. The noble Lord Strabogy, is replying for Her Majesty's government at the end of this debate. I should like to ask the noble Lord if he will contact his right honourable friend, the Minister of Defence, about the possibility of giving a broadcast interview about UFOs like his counterpart did across the Channel in 1974. This would go a long way to discredit the view held by a lot of people in this country that there is a cover-up here, and that in some way we are playing along with the United States over this. I would also like to see an intra-governmental study of the UFOs. All governments should get together and pool their knowledge about UFOs, and the results should be passed on to the public. I would like to thank your lordships for your kind attention. I beg leave to move the papers.
The question is that this motion be agreed to.
Lords, I'm bound to say that I face this speech with some trepidation. I had intended to start by wondering whether we were justified in holding what is in effect a full debate on this matter. But having seen the audience we've got tonight, and indeed heard the speech of the noble Earl Lord Clancarty, I can see that that sort of start would not go down too well. I may well be shouted down before I finish anyway, but let's see if we can avoid that right at the start. My lords, the noble Earl asks us in his motion to support the proposal, particularly for an intra-governmental study. I suppose he means a study, as he's described indeed, between governments. No doubt he would wish to see the cooperation of the United States, but I would not, I think, want to support that sort of proposal. I don't think the time has yet come when we can view this matter with sufficient certainty to justify expenditure of public money on it. I certainly agree that the numerous voluntary bodies, including those with which the noble Earl is associated, ought to be encouraged, and indeed I would not be opposed to informal links between those bodies, or at least the responsible ones, and others like the Ministry of Defence. But I'm ashamed to say, my lords, in the midst of all this faith, that I am not myself a believer in UFOs, described as I believe they are, as objects or vehicles from another planet or from another universe. I have some 2,500 hours as a pilot. I've flown across the Atlantic a few times as a pilot, but unlike the aircraft reported by the noble Earl, I've never seen one. I presume, indeed I believe, that a good many of the sightings can be explained by logical scientific theory. And I am so far, at least, convinced that those that cannot so far be so explained could be if our knowledge were more advanced, or if we had more particular information about the sightings in question. It is these unexplained sightings upon which ufologists rely so heavily in asking us to accept their theories. But I believe, as I say, that these unexplained sightings could be, and indeed would be explained, if we had more knowledge about them, better photographs, for example. How many clear photographs of UFOs have you seen, my lords? All I've seen are hazy, fudgy photographs which could or could not be genuine. Ufologists often rely upon radar information for the evidence in their case. But I must tell your lordships that radar plays more tricks even than the camera. And I don't believe that radar information in this context is valid. For example, the recent sighting in New Zealand, which was widely reported just before Christmas, I think, including some rather strange-looking photographs which appeared on television, were also said to have been confirmed by radar information available to the to the aircraft in question. But I know from my own experience that radar is frequently used and indeed designed for detecting anomalies in atmospheric conditions and in weather patterns, and I'm not persuaded that radar is a valid supporting argument in this case. My lords, since time immemorial, man has ascribed those phenomena that he could not explain to some supernatural or extraterrestrial agency. Eventually, as scientific wisdom advanced, these phenomena are understood more fully. Until now, today, no one takes witchcraft seriously, and there are no fairies at the bottom of my garden. It's not so long ago that magnetism, as it occurs naturally in the form of lodestone, was thought to be the work of the devil, as indeed were some of the hot springs found in Iceland and Australia and elsewhere. An eclipse of the sun or the moon, now fully understood, was once thought to be an expression of the Almighty's displeasure. Perhaps this derives from the description in the Gospels of the events following the crucifixion. I recall, my lords, the 44th verse of St. Luke, of the 23rd chapter of Luke's Gospel, and I will read it if I may. It was about the 6th hour, and there was a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour, and the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. St. Matthew describes it rather well also. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. No one would now seriously doubt that these happenings were in fact an eclipse of the sun and an earthquake, respectively. I would not deny that there may have been divine intervention in respect of the timing of those events, but certainly I would say they were caused by terrestrial forces which we now fully understand. Without wishing to preempt anything that the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Norwich, may say, perhaps I may pose the question as to whether the existence of another race or races outside our universe is compatible with our Christian principles. I speak only as a simple member of the Christian faith, but I believe that he loves us and us alone. I'm not aware that there is any suggestion in the works of Christ or in the words of the Almighty, as recorded, that we must share his goodness with peoples from another universe. There's no suggestion that there is, indeed, any other such people. I acknowledge, however, that, for example, the works of Darwin were once thought incompatible with Christian faith, and so perhaps my view of the credibility of these things from a Christian point of view is open to correction, and perhaps the Right Reverend Prelate will be able to help us when he comes to speak. I emphasize that I don't for a moment doubt the sincerity and conviction of those who believe in these objects, that believe that they are visitors from another universe, or at least some supernatural force beyond our reason. I simply do not happen to agree with them. I certainly do not agree with the learned professor speaking on the radio the other morning who said, anyone who believes in UFOs is a loony. But as for the suggestion that an international study group should be set up, well, I don't think that I could countenance that as a serious proposal at this time. But I emphasize that I would be happy to encourage the informal links between the RAF, for example, and the very worthy groups who believe differently to the way I do. My lords, before I sit down, I'd just like to say how much I'm looking forward to the maiden speech of my noble friend, the Viscount Oxfuird, who is to speak later in the debate. His name has, of course, appeared on the order paper before today, and I hope it appears on the list of speakers a good many times in the future. The noble Earl Lord Clancarty has done us a service by bringing this matter forward, but I would counsel caution and care.
My lords, as the noble Lord Trefgarne has said, I'm sure the majority of noble lords in this chamber will be greatly indebted to the noble Earl Lord Clancarty for raising this fascinating and controversial subject this evening. Before I begin, perhaps I should say I have an interest in it because I am director of a company which is going to make an identified flying object, the thermo skyship, which is saucer-shaped. So do not let us get that muddled up. But, my lords, in spite of sceptics like the noble Lord Whig, the other day in the newspaper, Sir Bernard Lovell from Jodrell Bank, who says that UFOs don't exist, I think we must agree that they do, because otherwise there would be no unidentified flying objects. And furthermore, we wouldn't have, throughout the world, radio telescopes listening to try and pick up signals from intelligences in outer space. UFOs, my lords, as the noble Earl, Lord Clancarty said, are not products of the 20th century imagination. They've been observed for years here by the North American Indians, by the monks of Byland Abbey in the year 1290, who were terrified by the appearance of a huge silver disc. And through history, right up to today, millions of people have seen UFOs. And I will go as far as to say that I am the first to admit that a very large majority, percentage of these, can be explained by natural or man-made phenomena. Meteorites, satellite debris, weather balloons, military flares, etc. But there are still many which are completely unexplained. My lords, it has been reported that the United States and the USSR signed a pact in 1971 to swap UFO information. But the pact stated that they were to keep the rest of the world in the dark. And I believe that the pact was signed so that neither superpower would make mistakes about UFOs being atomic missiles. I'm also led to understand that quite recently the 3 United States balloonists who crossed the Atlantic were followed for up to 12 hours by UFOs, but were ordered by US government agents not to discuss them. My lords, we know that war in space, once a figment of the imagination, and a subject much beloved by science fiction writers, is very nearly a fact now. Both superpowers have or will have killer satellites and laser beams operating in space. And I ask the noble Lord Trebogi if he would agree that this may perhaps be one of the reasons for the reticence of the United States to be more forthcoming about their UFO information. In 1977, Sir Eric Gairy, the Prime Minister of Grenada, backed by President Carter, wanted the United Nations to declare 1978 as the year of the UFO. They both failed, but the proposition was finally last year tabled for September the 29th. It was postponed, this proposition, through October, November, and December. And then it was finally threatened by the veto of the United States and Russia. However, hopefully it will now be considered in June this year. And I believe that at last there has been a unanimous vote that the proposition will not be rejected. Now, my lords, I entirely agree that a lot of these unidentified flying objects we do not understand, as the noble Lord Trefgarne said, because of our lack of knowledge. My lords, UFOs defy worldly logic. And even if one accepts that there may be life elsewhere in our galaxy, or even in other galaxies, The human mind cannot begin to comprehend UFO characteristics. Their propulsion, their sudden appearance, their disappearance, their great speeds, their silence, their maneuvers, their apparent anti-gravity, their changing of shapes. They defy our present knowledge and laws of matter. And of course this naturally upsets our earthly scientists because it is outside their earthly terms of reference and knowledge. But, my lords, to try and present UFOs in a more mundane light, let us briefly examine the last 30 years. The US Air Force in 1947 started an official project called SIGN. By 1949, 243 reports had been submitted of UFOs. But no conclusive evidence came to the public knowledge from this project. Project Blue Book was then started, and it was born. And the findings produced the same conclusion. And so it appears that the United States Air Force concern was threefold. One, to see if UFOs were a threat to the security of the United States. Two, to see if UFOs could contribute technical and scientific knowledge. And three, to explain to the general American public what was going on in their airspace. However, as UFOs appeared to offer no threat to security, Project Blue Book became just a public relations exercise to not inform the public, in spite of numerous unidentified radar trackings and close approaches made by UFOs to both civil and military aircraft. The military staff in America said that as there was no threat or danger, they were not interested in pursuing the subject any further. And so Project Blue Book was abandoned. My lords, this may be good enough to fob off the American public, but it is not good enough to fob off the British public. Too many people, ordinary people as well as famous people, have seen UFOs. 10 governments now openly admit that UFOs exist and are real. France, Norway, Sweden, Brazil, the Argentine, Venezuela, Mexico, the Philippines, Peru, and Grenada. Other governments know UFOs exist, but do not admit it publicly. President Carter has personally seen a UFO. My lords, a small sample of prominent scientific and sane people who have seen or believe through evidence that UFOs exist. Commander Robert McLaughlin, US Navy missile expert. John McCormack, Speaker, United States House of Representatives. The late Air Chief Marshal Lord Dowding. The late President Truman. Dr. Stanton Friedman, US nuclear physicist. Ed Mitchell, Apollo astronaut. Gordon Cooper, Apollo astronaut. Dr. Alan Hynek, Professor of Astronomy, Northwest University. Walter Cronkite, US newscaster. Neil Armstrong, first man on the moon. And lastly, Dr. Felix Zeigel, Professor of Higher Maths and Astronomy, Moscow Aeronautical Institute. My lords, honestly, can any of your lordships sincerely believe that these aforementioned people all suffer either from hallucinations or believe in fairy stories? My lords, in fact, in spite of the United States and the USSR embargo on UFO information, funnily enough, the Russians appear more inclined to think that UFOs have extraterrestrial origins. Further, some Russian scientists see a connection between UFOs and paranormal phenomena. In fact, there is an ever-growing belief that space travel has a connection with telepathy and telekinesis, because cosmonauts in orbit have discovered with scientific tests that they have an increased level of telepathic communication. Now, my lords, if we assume that extraterrestrial intelligences who travel to Earth are more advanced than we are, and in that respect I think they must be, then UFOs could be telekinetic phenomena, in other words, controlled by thought pulses. And my lord, since thought is not subject to the physical limitations of matter, these velocities in excess of the speed of light would be possible. It is interesting to me, my lords, that in 1968 I was talking to Sir Frank Whittle, the inventor of the jet engine and an eminent scientist, and we were talking about interstellar space travel. And it was just before the Americans had actually landed on the moon. And Sir Frank said that he thought it would be perfectly feasible one day to go to the stars, as he did not believe in Einstein's theory of relativity. A remark like this coming from an ordinary man like myself would probably quite rightly be laughed at, but one can certainly not laugh at it when it is made by such an eminent person as Sir Frank Whittle. And what is interesting is that 2 years later, in 1970, Dr. Fomin, a Russian doctor of telekinesis and automation, argued that to traverse interstellar space, we would have to grapple with physical laws different to what we know at present, and which so far are only theory. However, these principles have been established in a mathematical formulae, and therefore, my lords, Einstein's concept of time and space possibly may not apply. Now, in 1976, President Carter, in a pre-election pledge, stated, I quote, "If I become president, I will make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists. I am convinced that UFOs exist. I have seen one," unquote. This statement, my lords, was a breakthrough against the United States cover-up, as it admitted that not all UFO information is or has been available to the American public. For instance, do your lordships know that 3 former US presidents, before their election, proclaimed their belief in UFOs? President Eisenhower, President Lyndon Johnson, and President Ford, who I agree was appointed. Now, during their presidencies, they became completely silent and did not fulfill their promises. Why? I strongly suspect that Her Majesty's government know why. And if Her Majesty's government does know why, I think that they ought to inform your lordships. I believe that there is much material evidence in UFOs in the National Archives in the United States which has never been made known to the public. And even President Carter was finding it difficult to carry out his pre-election pledge. I'm led to believe he has tried unsuccessfully with NASA to do UFO research. And the answer that he has been given is no, due to expense. Now, my lords, this research, which NASA would be required to do, would cost a few $1 million. But a few $1 million is only the cost of 2 astronaut suits. It therefore appears obvious, for some reason, that there is a cover-up in the United States. Now, my lords, we in the United Kingdom are in a strange position because we have had thousands of sightings, yet I am led to understand that the Ministry of Defence have only 2 clerks working on UFO sightings. And further, they claim that they are not spending any money on UFO research. They appear reluctant to investigate publicly connected phenomena such as alleged messages from outer space. They say that this is the responsibility of the BBC and the Post Office. Can the Minister say if the BBC and the Post Office know they have this responsibility? And further, when the noble Lord Strabogy answers, would he confirm that Her Majesty's government might be sympathetic and give support to President Carter's, Dr. Kurt Waldheim's, and Sir Eric Gary's efforts to get the United Nations to debate the resolutions, quote, to discover the origin, nature, and intent of UFOs. The noble Earl of Clancarty said we should set up a parliamentary UFO group to meet a few times a year. I would concur with him. And further, my lords, I think the general public should be encouraged to come forward with evidence. Many do. Many do not, rather, for fear of being ridiculed. Let them be open. Let them be honest. Let them badger their MP, the government, to be open with them and cease what I am convinced is a cover-up here. The people of Britain have a right to know all that the governments not only of this country, but others throughout the world know about UFOs. And before I sit down, I ask the noble Lord Strobogie if he will tell your lordships why the Ministry of Defence has not informed the public of 18 contacts from May the 23rd, 1977, up to February the 22nd, 1978, numbered K5634 to K5651 inclusive. And further, what do the classification numbers 5, 3, 20, 16, 6, 8, and 23 mean for these 18 contacts? And further, does the noble lord realize that 13 out of these contacts were seen during the hours of daylight? There need be no fear that the people of this country may panic, as if UFOs are extraterrestrial, their intelligence and knowledge is far away from our primitive understanding. I heartily support the noble Earl of Clancarty's motion for an inter-governmental body to research UFOs. Let Her Majesty's government be an example to the rest of the world by being a leader in this investigation.
My lords, first of all, I would like to thank the noble Earl Lord Clancarty for initiating this extremely interesting debate. Of course, it's really much above my head, but I've really enjoyed it already, and I hope I shall enjoy it for the rest of the evening. My lords, the question really is, to me, first of all, where have these UFOs come from? There couldn't be a great many answers to that, but firstly, we can look at our own planets, and there's no doubt about it that there's very little chance of them having come from anything in our own solar system. In fact, I think I would be permitted to quote a few words from Professor Copal's recent book on the solar system, which he finishes up after lamenting the fact of what they found out about Mars. The hope of finding life on Mars has evaporated, together with the canals into the thin Martian air. It is now almost certain that as living beings we are alone in the solar system. I think that is just a very good example of the fact we can't look for where these things come from, if they do come from anywhere. You can't look to the solar system. The next possibility, which people have raised, is that it might come from a sister sun in our own galaxy. That, of course, is quite possible. If you believe in the now accepted, or should we say, more popular theory of the Big Bang for the start of the universe, then no doubt about it that our sun and its solar system must have been shared with many others, and that moment when we suddenly we appeared. They even give dates for it now. They talk about 5,000 years, 5,000 million years ago, which fits in with the geological background of our Earth. There must be then perhaps many stars that have a solar system which we might well be in a position to be in the same position. They might have one planet as we have, as good as ours, with the same amount of knowledge. On the other hand, we've got to accept the fact that, as the Noble Earl Lord Kimberley was saying, it would have to be something which we have not been able to attain on this earth, and something we don't understand on this earth. Because if you wanted, say, from A Centauri, which is our nearest star, if you wanted to get from there to here, it would take half a lifetime. Even traveling faster than anything we've ever produced in the way of spaceships here in this world of ours. The distance is 250,000 times the distance of us from our sun. That's 93 million miles. So, I mean, the answer is that it's a distance which would certainly take half a lifetime, even at 100,000 miles an hour. So, I don't think it would be reasonable to look at another solar system, say A Centauri, which is quite very near. It's only 4 and a quarter, roughly 4 and a quarter light years from us, which isn't very much in space. However, there is, of course, the possibility that they may come from some secret effort on this earth, which I very much doubt, because you couldn't keep a thing like that secret for about 20 or 30 years. You would never succeed in keeping it secret, so I very much doubt that the possibility of it being on this earth is at all possible. And so we get to an entirely different picture. We have progressed in the last 30 years, both in cosmology and in many other sciences, more than we've ever done before, certainly in my lifetime. And I think the feeling really is that we are now on the edge of something in the universe which we don't understand yet. However, if we are going to understand the UFO question, we've got to move to the extent of understanding something beyond what we realize in cosmology today. And from our point of view, what we're looking at is the tip of the iceberg. We know perfectly well that we get information, we put it into our computers, and we come out at the other end with a new model, and then in 5, 6, 10 years, the model's thrown away, and we're back again with the one answer, which applies, unfortunately. There's so much of science today, we just don't know. But one hopes that it would be possible, especially if the suggestion of the Noble Earl Lord Clancarty, and which was backed up by the Noble Earl Lord Kimberley, that we should have a worldwide organization, and why should we not be the leaders of it, to look into this matter, to go further than we've ever done. It would twist science back into a new field of finding whether it was conceivably possible that there were not merely another solar system in our galaxy, but somewhere in one of the many galaxies, the whole vast expanding universe, there were not other places where these things could come from with their amazingly high scientific knowledge. I must say that I personally see no valid reason why I must accept that at this time yet. But we start working for it. And if we had a worldwide organization to try and control that, perhaps we should be able to solve many of the problems which face us today in the whole of the question of the universe. And nothing could be better, and even then we might possibly find the answer to our UFOs.
Well, my lords, as the lone figure on this side of the House that dared to come in on this debate, may I say that it's been a pleasure to listen to the noble Viscount who's spoken, Lord Oxford, and who has, in his own inimitable way, as a result of his military and other experience over the years, brought a certain depth and profundity to the request for some investigation into the phenomena with which mankind is presented today. Consequently, with all sincerity, I can say, my lords, that I hope this House will have the pleasure of listening to his lordship on many occasions, adding his voice to our deliberations. And I thank him for what he has said. Now I want to attack the problem in my own way. And first I want to ask, what are we talking about? And you see, secondly now, after expressing my gratitude for the maiden speech, to also express my thanks to the noble Earl of Clancarty, who initiated this debate to call attention to the increasing number of sightings and landings on a worldwide scale of unidentified flying objects. I want a drop of water, my dear, before... There's no argument about that. Don't let the noble lord be downhearted by...
They've all been drunk out of it.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. I caught a frightful cold, I don't know, I think I'm nearly over it. Don't let the noble lord, Clancarty, be a little bit sad because of dandy intellectualism that may approach this debate. The world oozes with intellectuality and at the present moment is completely lacking in wisdom. And always remember, I've said it many times here, it's my dear old mother that taught me this. She used to say, and she made me go to my Sunday schools and quote the text. Always remember, my boy, in Welsh, Solomon didn't ask for cleverness, he asked for wisdom. And there's a vast difference between the dandy intellectualism of some of the reporters and newspapers' approach to this problem and the wise approach that we've just heard in this maiden speech. Let's anchor that down. What else does the noble Earl ask for? He says, on a worldwide scale and the need for an inter-Governmental study. This has come now, and I will add to it from the other side of the House as well. I think the expense would be so small that we should not neglect it. Now, anybody who knows something about laser beams, and the first time in a laboratory in Switzerland I saw the effect of a laser beam, it would be quite possible to throw onto that table now an identified or unidentified object that would look palpable like Macbeth's dagger. You remember the famous dagger scene? Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle towards my hand? In a form, he says, then as palpable as this which now I draw. We could, with a laser beam, throw a dagger that would look as palpable onto that table with laser beams. There may be an understanding of the power of laser and its effect existing in some kind of technology that is beyond the dimensions in which we can work. And we've been looking in mathematics with fifth and even sixth dimension. Now, I better pick up my notes, this will be a long time. Don't get worried, so much has been quoted that it saves me a lot of quotations too. Now, I want to ask a $64,000 question. Do noble lords believe in angels? The answer from some of you will be yes, and you've never seen one. We're asking you to believe in the phenomena of flying saucers that have been seen by now, I should think, probably millions, hundreds of thousands without exaggeration. And if we are studying hagiography, I'd better be careful.
Right.
If we are studying hagiography, which is the history of the saints, if I came off my Welsh mountains and came down the mountain as a little boy of 12 and said I'd seen the Virgin Mary springing out of a rock, some devout religious people would believe me. But if I said I'd seen a flying saucer, they would not have believed me. What's the difference? And it's a question that has to be asked. It's a philosophical question that has to be asked when intellectuality, in its pompous way, in its Sunday newspaper articles, is dealing in print with mysteries that Shakespeare described. To misquote him, there is more in heaven and earth. It's slightly misquoted, purposely, than is dwelt of, you see, or thought of, in man's philosophy. And so, this deserves not being pushed aside, although, mark you, noble lords, I was told today outside those doors that an ambassador 8'6" with green feet and webbed feet as well had asked where he could park his flying saucer in our car park, according to some of the telephones that have been ringing here today, because some people have treated the whole matter as a joke. I would therefore suggest to them that they read H.G. Wells' final essay. They can read it in half an hour. It's slim, it's cogent, it's succinct, where he says the human mind is at the end of its tether. There is a queerness in the cosmology of the world in which we are now living. Was Wells right? Are we visiting queer? We are certainly seeing mankind acting queer when petrol is short. He's a snarling worse than any being out of space. And the anthropological arrogance of 20th century man in his tin pot motor cars riding through the streets of this lovely spaceship we call the world is something heartbreaking to see, because he's learnt nothing through his 2 wars, and if we had another, God help mankind, the way he has shown his greed and his selfishness and tendency to panic as never before, I think, since the days of the Crusades. One of the greatest delusions in the history of man was the delusion of the Crusades. But men did it after the days of Peter the Hermit, with a fiery and fierce belief that they were doing something. Now, the noble Earl is an expert, and they wrote about him. In fact, he dropped everything else to write about this. His 7 books have been translated into many languages. Congratulations. It's done a job of work, I think. And I hope that this debate, initiated by the noble Earl, will get some attention. And when people tend to scoff, it's only a few days ago we were singing at the piano, playing and knocking out, not with the brilliance of a top pianist, about we 3 kings of Orient are. And they followed what? They followed a star. What was this star? We have had an intellectual analysis after the crucifixion of darkness spreading over the earth, and the intellectual assumptions of the noble Lord Trefgarne, who, as piloted from one side of the ocean to the other, was explained by earthquakes and the eclipses. We're not sure how we explain eclipses or earthquakes completely, but we got a kind of Kepler mathematics that times things rather nicely. But that's not quite enough. Explaining the earthquakes and explaining doesn't alter to say that the mystery of the UFOs is something that can be brushed aside. It is anthropological arrogance to so say. Now, The House has heard, good heavens, 9 minutes. The House has heard. All right, don't get too worried, about 4 more, or 5 maybe. The House has heard a number of notable people quoted. Ordinary little people have sometimes been laughed at, especially the famous sighting at Pascagoula in Mississippi, where one little fellow fainted when he saw a chap with one leg jumping towards him, who had a wizened and wrinkled face with pointed ears, crabbed claws, hands and slits for eyes, and holes beneath his nostrils. Well, they wouldn't be nostrils without holes, I should hope, and one leg. Well, now, we won't take fantastic descriptions like that. We won't go into those realms. But we will say there are many people who have said that these phenomena they have experienced. And the New Zealand thing has reawakened man's interest. Granted, as the noble Lord Trefgarne said, they weren't clear pictures. But I went to a scientific lecture in this noble building not so long ago, somebody who believed faithfully in the Loch Ness Monster. Yeah. And he showed us masses of films. And he was a scientist swearing that the Loch Ness Monster existed. Well, it's just as much case for the existence of these flying saucers. We know they're there. All we are saying is they're unidentified. They may be terrestrial, they may be celestial. We are asking governments to find an answer. That's all the debate is about. No magic, nothing up our sleeves. Let the world know what is going on. Yeah. Now, this renewed interest proposes many problems, and some of them, many research organizations, which to save time, I'll not bore the House with repeating. They know they exist. Let's ask a couple of questions. How can a flying saucer fly faster than sound and not create a supersonic boom? These are questions. What is it? Secondly, have we the right to assume that we alone are in the universe? You see, this anthropomorphic view of God that some people have built up doesn't build up for the spirit, and doesn't, I think, build for true holiness, and it doesn't build up for real Christian spirit if it's followed too fully. I would say, therefore, that we have no right to assume that we are the only intelligent beings in the universe. Is the Earth the only planet populated by intelligent technological life? I don't know. And I don't suppose we'll be able to find that answer yet. Because if in the year of Queen Elizabeth I had said to somebody in London, I could show them a picture of Philip of Spain in Madrid on a piece of glass in his room, I'd have probably been burnt at the stake as a wizard or a witch if I were a woman. But we can do that today. We have broken through, and we have a miracle on Earth of television, from the moon even. Now, are the flying saucers, can they be, or these objects be explained? There are two basic facts, therefore. First, the scientific examination of the probability. It's due to mankind for governments to search into this. Secondly, to fathom the possibilities of the existence of this phenomena. Astronomers are now increasing their search for extraterritorial radio signals. But none so far, I am told, despite what the noble Lord Kimberley said, have really and truly been discovered. And the billions of stars in the galaxy makes the problem at this moment too much for us. The question of speed. Well, the speed of light is 6 trillion, a light year is 6 trillion miles. We don't want to go into it. The question of relativity is interesting. I'm not qualified to argue about it. Never got to mathematics at that height. But I do know that in Einstein's theory, he believed that extra magnetic waves have no mass and are therefore not affected by his theory. But he did say that as an object, if it has mass, approaches the speed of light, its mass becomes infinite. That might explain the black holes that we talk about. We are talking of mysteries that we never knew anything about before. Now, for a couple of generations now, thousands of magazines and everything else have been reporting this. We want to know if these objects that are unidentified deserve real research in depth. Whether or not it is true, only our prejudices can decide. And it becomes more difficult to listen to such weird experiences from apparently honest, sane, and unself-seeking men who place their findings before papers, governments. And to call these men liars, hallucinators, or sensationalists, are we right in doing it? Because if there is one human being out of the tens of thousands who are alleged to have seen these phenomena, and they are telling the truth, then there is a dire need for us to look into it. Those who believe in psychic phenomena, who believe in spiritualism, those who can believe in the synchronicity of ghosts, as they've tried to explain it, shouldn't scoff at the possibility of these unidentified objects. Poltergeists we know to exist, and the activities. So therefore, do not be so ready to scoff about UFOs when on another moment, if I catch you talking, you'll agree with me that poltergeists do exist. Gentlemen, my lords, this debate is a serious debate. It deserves study and it deserves understanding.
Yeah, there we are.
My lords, I count it a privilege to follow the Viscount Oxford also, and to link myself with the words which Lord Davies of Leek has said in congratulating him on his maiden speech. At the beginning of his speech, I had jotted down that I would like to thank him for his down-to-earth speech. But when we got right out to A Centaura, I realized that that phrase was of no use anyway. But we do congratulate him. We look forward to hearing his voice often and again. And I'm glad to be able to follow, but without, of course, the Welsh fire or fervour, what Lord Davies of Leek said to us. I have a little Irish blood in my veins, my noble lord, and that's why I understand everything you say, which is a help. I'm sure that the request by the Earl of Clancarty to call attention to the increasing number of sightings and landings on a worldwide scale of unidentified flying objects is a proper thing to do, and I'm most glad that we've brought this whole issue out into the open, and we are giving the unhurried opportunity of talking about it tonight. I think it's right that we should give a cool and scientific look at all unidentified flying objects, not only just for natural curiosity, not even and only, as I think the Earl of Kimberley was suggesting, for national security, but also for scientific research. And I think that there's been a time when leaders in the church have not always been as enthusiastic about pushing out the frontiers of knowledge as I believe we are today. And I hope very much that such a search will continue. Whether it should be an intra-governmental study, I'm not sure. We shall hear with interest what the noble Lord Strobogyi says to us about that. But that it should be studied, and studied seriously, I believe to be true. The interesting thing is that when a suggested UFO is seen in one part of the world, it seems to spark off a lot of sightings in other parts. And the fact of the New Zealand sightings a short time ago seemed to have produced a lot of sightings with us in Norfolk, and our Eastern Daily Press, which is a magnificent paper, accurate, fair, and always helpful to the church, has told us all about this recently. My immediate reaction when I was talking on television at lunchtime in Norwich today was to ring up the commanding officer of, no, for the sake of national security, I won't name the actual establishment, lest other ears in other spaces should be listening to me, to know whether, and I'm quite serious about this, to know whether when sightings had been suggested in Norfolk last week, whether in fact one of our particularly important RAF stations had anything to say about them. But I think we ought to be quite cool, quite firm, quite scientific, and really try and extend our knowledge in this area. But with the wealth of scientific and aeronautical and erudite knowledge in your Lordship's house, what is a bishop doing moving amongst the various parts of the chessboard on this checkered board? Well, I think really I have felt that I wanted to share anxieties on a rather narrow level, which I would like to share with your Lordships. This is the first area that I do believe that UFOs and the mystery surrounding them is helping today to build up a climate of credulity and in certain cases even of superstition, with the danger of a sort of ersatz spirituality almost reacting against the impersonality of our modern civilization, but not wholly involved in the total Christian commitment, which is a balanced commitment. In our Lambeth conference last summer, this phrase came up: the church gathers for worship, the church scatters for mission. The two sides of activity that the Church of God meets to worship God, but the Church of Christ scatters to spread the good news of the gospel. And my concern here is that the mystery surrounding UFOs today, and it's helped, I think, by the variety of films and programs which are in this area, is in danger of producing a modern 20th century superstition in our modern and scientific days, which is not unlike the superstition of past years. That's my first anxiety. The second is this, that UFOs and their study seem, from my small research in this area, to link up with a certain religious subculture which seems to do three things. It offers a substitute for true Catholic religion. I use the Catholic with a small c there. I mean the Christian faith in its widest but received sense. Secondly, I think it draws serious and sincere and often very charming people, and young people too, into a sub-Christian, and I'm afraid sometimes a non-Christian cult, often controlled by a dominant leader, and reproduces something of the Gnostic. I suppose really one wants to help people by saying Gnostic, but that's how it's spelt anyway. The Gnostic heresies of the tight-knit esoteric groups of the first, second and third centuries, where in fact I believe that Archbishop William Temple was right when he said the Church of Christ was the only society founded for its non-members to take what it knew of God and of Christ into the world that others might know too. And I see a certain danger of the linking of religion with the UFO situation at that level. And some Christian researchers suggest that those who become deeply involved in the religious aspects of the UFO situation come under a psychic domination which can be of serious distress to them and to their own personal life. Now, this is my anxiety. I may be wrong, but I put it forward with some care, having thought and studied a good deal about it. And therefore my third anxiety, and I'm sorry to be negative, but it's important, I think, to share both the light and the dark sides, is the danger of the religious aspect of the UFO situation, which is admittedly, as one knows from reading the variety, fascinating variety of groups, large and small, concerned with all the other areas of this. The religious aspect concerning UFOs can, in fact, I think, lead to the obscuring of basic Christian truths. When all said and done, as I see it, Christ himself is the agent of God in the creation of the world. I quote from Colossians, Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in Christ all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. This fascinating chapter in Colossians, which is perhaps one of the highest levels of Christological teaching, speaks of Christ being before all things, and in him all things consist, as the Authorized Version puts it, all things hold together. He is the great unifying, holding together principle of God's universe. Now, I say this in this debate, recognizing the danger of, as it were, preaching a sermon, but I think not in this case, because it seems to me that the very subject we're debating is helping to widen our horizons, and the maiden speech that we heard from Viscount Oxfuird stressed this point of looking far out. And I believe that Christ has not only a terrestrial, not only a cosmic significance, but literally a galactic significance. I really do believe that he is God's vice-regent concerning his great created world, and it's good that our minds and eyes should be stretched further out, because I don't believe that at any point of the universe we get beyond the hand of God, and it helps us therefore to understand the majesty of the Godhead when we begin to stretch our minds to reach out to the far corners of creation. And therefore,
From Prelate would allow me, is he actually offering ecclesiastical authority for an existence of another race of people in another universe? Is he saying that the existence of UFOs, together with their inhabitants, as is so often described to us, is compatible with Christian faith?
I thank Lord Trefgarne for his interjection, because it shows that he must be listening carefully, because the next thing on my notes is say something about Lord Trefgarne's remarks. So, but it's got about 20 seconds to go before I get to the noble lord. So if we can have a glass of water from the noble lord, Lord Davies, Leek for a moment or something, and I'm almost with the noble lord. I really am. No, what I was trying to say, I'm very glad for that interjection, because obviously I wasn't getting it right, what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say, and here are how my notes are going, that I do believe that all the far corners of the created world, right out, further than we can ever see or know, even by radio, are within the plan of the Creator. I believe they are within the majestic purposes of God, and I believe that Christ, as the Creator under the Godhead, is concerned with it all. Now, if I may come to to the noble lord's particular question a few minutes ago, his question went something like this: do we believe in the existence of another race? Is it possible that there is another race further afield? Well, I must say that I don't know, and that I believe there's a place for reverent Christian agnosticism concerning what is not revealed to us in Scripture and by our Lord. But, having said that, I do believe that God may have other plans for other worlds, but I believe that God's plan for this world is Jesus. And I think that that at least is how I view the question, and that the emphasis in Scripture is most interesting on the fact that there never seems a point beyond the revelation of Scripture where there is not God. And I quote, if I may follow the Lord Trefgarne once more before finishing what I had to say, in the most majestic opening letter to the Hebrews, in these last days God has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He reflects the glory of God. He bears the stamp of his nature, upholding the universe by his word of power. Upholding the universe by his word of power. And my point here is that the danger of getting the UFO thing linked with the religious thing is that it obscures, I believe, that Christ is the image of the invisible God, and that all God's purposes and plans for humanity are in and through his Son, our Lord. This is not popular. This is not agreed by dozens of people, and plenty of people think that the Christians make a proud and exclusive claim when they claim the words of our Lord, all power is given unto me in heaven and earth. But I think that this is part of the belief of a Christian, which he has to put humbly and lovingly and in the light of seeking to serve people. And so in the incarnation of our blessed Lord, clearly he revealed to us the mind of the Godhead, and I would feel that we should be careful in our study of the UFOs in a religious context, because I believe that the gospel of Christ and his death upon the cross for the salvation of sinners can never be bypassed by other forms of religious expression which may be esoteric, may be unusual, may appear to come to us in unusual ways. And for that reason, therefore, I'm happy that we should make a cool, clear, careful study of the whole UFO situation, but not let it be at the expense of the obscuring of the fullness of the Christian faith and its power to transform lives.
Darren, may I ask one question? I didn't entirely understand, though I agree with much of what the Reverend Prelate said, whether he was telling us that when one should not study UFOs in a religious context, it meant that one should not study music, art, other things that we all have, good, bad, and indifferent, in a religious context. If it means that we mustn't worship them, then I would be entirely in agreement as a professing Christian. We mustn't worship art, we mustn't worship architecture, we mustn't worship music. But not to study them in a religious context, I'm not quite clear whether I would agree or not.
Would the House give me permission in a sentence to seek to answer that, and then I will sit down? Just as I think it's important that the boys and girls in our schools today should know some basic facts about the great world religions, I still believe it is essential that in a so-called and named Christian country, our boys and girls should have the opportunity of knowing the great facts of the Christian faith. And I'm simply suggesting that if in fact people seeking for a religious experience bypass the revelation of God in Christ and revealed in Scripture, then they may be in difficulties which will hurt and harm them. It's simply the obscuring of the gospel, my concern.
I must begin with an apology. I'm afraid that before I knew that this debate was going to start so late, I did enter into an obligation for this evening, which I find it very difficult to escape from, and therefore I may not be able to stay the course. I'm so sorry. My lords, one happy thing about UFOs is that they have nothing whatever to do with party politics. And another is that they take one's minds off the absolutely frightful everyday events. And besides, another thing is that no theory in regard to them can possibly be laughed out of court, nor need angels in respect of them fear to tread. I'm sure Lord Davies will leave. My lords, though many alleged sightings are certainly of identifiable objects, of terrestrial objects, I think has been said, such as disintegrating satellites or balloons or meteors or whatnot, or even some sort of reflection, others are of things which on the face of it cannot not be accounted in this way or in this way. And the evidence of this is obviously too circumstantial to be disregarded. The evidence produced by the noble Earl, Lord Clancarty, and my noble friend Lord Kimberley is obviously too circumstantial. You can't disregard it. These things, I think it's almost certain they do exist. You can't say they don't exist, or it's difficult to say they don't exist. And so I therefore myself do not contest, unlike Lord Trefgarne, I don't contest their existence. Now, some objects may of course be of terrestrial origin, but equally some may not. But whatever their origin, it has certainly not as yet been proved that they contain or are controlled by sentient beings of any sort. Still less has it been demonstrated that such sentient beings come from another planet, of which we are told there are many millions in the universe, no doubt many thousands in which conditions may be practically similar to those on Earth. It is conceivable, therefore, that UFOs come from another world. But that, to say the least, is not certain. Or let us say it's not yet certain. So let us for a moment examine the terrestrial and the non-terrestrial hypotheses. Well, if these objects are terrestrial, if they come somewhere within our world, then they may conceivably be attributable to some condition of the atmosphere or upper atmosphere, unknown to us, producing electrical or similar phenomena which interfere, no doubt, with compasses, and for some reason dart about the sky, even sometimes coming to Earth. Well, the difficulty about such an explanation is that they never seem to come into actual contact with aircraft or any other airborne objects. Even if collisions have sometimes been suspected, they haven't been proved to have occurred, nor do they ever crash, apparently, into anything important on the ground. When they are alleged to have been seen on the ground, it is always incidentally away from houses. So they may possibly, I suppose it's conceivable, they may possibly be capable of passing right through physical objects, their mindless trajectory being therefore harmless and dictated by some unknown physical cause, and their apparent presence on the ground being due to some local conditions of the surface. Well, I say that's a conceivable hypothesis. And in any case, the fact that their occasional presence is so far inexplicable doesn't in itself invalidate the terrestrial hypothesis. There are more things on heaven than earth, on heaven rather, there are more things in heaven, I think the noble Lord Davies of Leek said, than are dreamt of in our philosophy. Now, one terrestrial possibility can, however, be discarded, I think, namely that the one which attributes them to some Soviet activity in Central Asia, in some way heralding World War III. Now, this hypothesis was current, I remember very well, in America at the time of the Korean War, when I was in New York. And it was responsible for the only known joke ever perpetrated by a Soviet functionary, namely Mr. Gromyko, who, when asked what he thought about flying saucers, said, "Some people say that these objects are due to the excessive consumption in the United States of Scotch whisky. But I say that is not so. They are due to the activities of a Soviet athlete, a discus thrower in eastern Siberia, practicing for the Olympic Games and quite unconscious of his strength." That, I say, is the only known joke about Soviet diplomat. Well, if these objects are not terrestrial, then admittedly, always supposing that they exist and are not mere illusions, they must therefore be of some non-terrestrial origin. We can, I think, discard the possibility they come from any of the planets. I think that was said by the noble Viscount Lord Oxfuird, whose intervention in his maiden speech we all so much appreciated, and whom I hope we shall hear again from shortly. Venus is too hot, Mars is a lifeless wilderness, and the conditions of the others are extremely unlikely to be compatible with any form of life. So whence do they come? Well, in that case, only from a planet in some other starry system, which the nearest, as I think the noble Viscount said, is of course the star Proxima Centauri, is 4.5 light years away. Well, always supposing that the UFOs are manned by sentient beings who travel at the speed of light, And if you travel at the rate of 186,000 miles an hour a second, how do you slow down on approaching the atmosphere? It's not difficult to imagine. These creatures must have been cooped up in their small machines for no less than 4.5 terrestrial years before appearing in our atmosphere. Well, one can perhaps imagine that they may somehow have escaped from time and consequently not need any sustenance or sleep. But, my lords, it is difficult, even on that hypothesis, to believe that their machines are somehow time-exempt and can consequently contain enough propellant, to say the least, to keep them steady on their millinery way. For if an UFO was launched near Proxima Centauri, then proceeded at the rate of which astronauts go to the moon, it would take, so I am credibly informed, not 100,000 years, but something more like 900,000 years before it reached the Earth. In which case it is indisputable that any non-terrestrial UFO now sighted, whether in New Zealand or anywhere else, must have started on its journey something like 1 million years ago. That's to say, since after all the human race lives within time, long before any kind of recognizable human society existed here below. It is, however, also indisputable that UFOs have been observed at least for many hundreds of years, I think it's already been said, in Europe and I believe also in China and elsewhere. There are records of medieval monks having seen cigar-like objects in the heavens, and indeed it is quite possible that such sightings have occurred during the last few thousand years. We think it probably has. There may be more sightings now, simply because we have better facilities for observing them. But if so, what conclusion must we draw as regards the whole non-terrestrial hypothesis? Simply that the sentient and obviously highly intelligent beings from another planet, if such they be, at the end of an interminable journey, are content simply to hover about our atmosphere and not attempt a landing, or at least a landing of which we have any incontrovertible evidence. What would be the point of such a strange proceeding? Surely in the last few thousand years, the sentient and intelligent beings must have picked up enough information to conclude that a serious landing was feasible, or if not feasible, then to abandon the whole idea. Perhaps they even in some mysterious way have been able to master our language and penetrate our thoughts. I think it was my noble friend the Earl of Kimberley who said that conceivably they were controlled by a sort of thought control from a planet in the neighborhood of Alpha Centauri. Well, if that is so, if it really is simply a thought control, then it comes down apparently to a sort of cosmic joke played by these intelligent sentient beings 4.5 light years away on the unfortunate inhabitants of this country. It's not them, it's a kind of hallucination. They induce us by thought control to see these objects. Well, that's a conceivable theory, but I don't know if it's a very tenable one. Now, there are, it is true, those who believe that major landings from outer space have in fact taken place in the past, resulting in the inauguration of a new era of heavenly visitors who then apparently withdrew after leaving behind some kind of representative, presumably to see how it would all work out, the new civilization which they brought down this world. In Colombia and Peru, there are, I believe, strange markings on the ground which are thought to be neutralized by some sort of spaceships, together with traditions of an otherworldly father of the race, notably I think of the Inca race who came down the sky. And in fact, I think such traditions are fairly widespread in the world, though there is of course no proof that such father figures ever did come down from the sky. And the nearest run in time to our own era, and I only quote this to draw attention to the lengths to which this kind of belief can go, is the theory, quite popular I believe in Russia, that Christ was a cosmonaut, the Star of Bethlehem being a large UFO from which, to the amazement of the shepherds, emerged the heavenly host who left the babe in the manger to the great benefit of all mankind and then departed whence they came. Well, you can believe such heretical imaginations if you will, And perhaps if you believe in the divine origin of Christ and his teaching, it wouldn't matter very much if you do believe this, I think, rather nonsensical belief. But you can certainly believe, if you want to, that the UFOs contain people from another world which is watching us, whose intentions are benevolent, and perhaps designed to save our distracted planet from the horrors of another war by somehow disposing of the wicked and thus inaugurating a new era. You can believe that if you like. But, my lords, I'm afraid that all such imaginings are chiefly due to the discontent with the present human condition and to an unconscious desire to escape from the horrors or potential horrors of our earthly life. When we believed that if we were good, we would, when we died, go to heaven, there was no inclination to go to some other world near Andromeda. And whether another world other than heaven itself was watching us didn't worry us over much. Presumably, it was the angels. But the more overpopulated our planet becomes, the greater the violence and the more appalling the wars, the more unconsciously, perhaps, we want to leave it, if we can, or trust in otherworldly intervention, and the more intense, therefore, the longing, the greater the temptation to believe that there actually is somewhere else to which we can physically go, or to which we can somehow make appeal. It was a great disappointment when the moon was discovered to be a mass of grey plasticine, and Mars was even more unpleasant in the middle of Sahara, and Venus was the nearest thing to hell. Well, my lords, what is the moral? I come to the end of my 10 minutes. What is the moral? And here I think that I would agree with what the Right Reverend Prelate has said so eloquently, to whom we are so much indebted for his intervention. Perhaps the moral is that we better not put our trust in sources for salvation, but rather concentrate on how best to conduct ourselves here below, as eventually to die in peace and charity with our neighbors. If the UFOs do contain sentient beings, we can only leave it to such beings to get in touch with them, get in touch with us, when and if they will. Up till now, if they exist, they have done no harm of any kind. They apparently have done no harm for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. So there really doesn't seem to be any very great need to set up some intergovernmental machinery for investigating the whole phenomenon. The mystery, my lords, in other words, may suitably remain a mystery. And so far as I can see, nobody will be in any way the worse off if it does.
My lords, may I add my thanks to those which the noble Earl Lord Clancarty has already had for opening this debate in such an extremely interesting way. I found my imagination boggling a little at some of the things he told us. But nevertheless, I feel it is of immense value that this matter has been brought out into the open by the discussion in this House. And I hope that there will be, as a result of it, some progress in the understanding of what is an extremely mysterious matter. My lords, I feel that we must be careful about our terminology in discussing this UFO problem. And I think I'll make clear in the course of my remarks what I mean by that. But for example, in the last few days, since it was known to my friends that I was taking part in this debate, I've had over and over again the question, do you believe in UFOs? Well, I must say that I think that is rather a silly question. Because if I saw something in the sky which neither I nor whoever was with me could identify, I haven't, but if I did, then I should have seen an unidentified flying object, a UFO. I don't have to believe in it. I should just believe I'd seen it. Something that I couldn't explain. And I think that a lot of people are in that position. Well, it has been said, my lords, more than once this evening, that this is no new phenomenon. I think the noble Earl, Lord Clancarty, dated it back to 1300 BC,
Whether my researches have taken me further back, I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure that your lordships will be as familiar as I am with the 10th chapter of the prophet Ezekiel. He certainly saw something very unfamiliar in the firmament, and it certainly could be called a UFO. It was very different from the modern ones. It appears to have been coal-fired, to have been stabilized by gyroscopes, and to be crewed by cherubim. And it's a model which has not, so far as I know, been developed. But there have been a good many sightings, probably before Ezekiel, and certainly there have been many thousands since. And I fear, my lords, that there has grown up a belief in many minds that if an object in the skies is unidentifiable, then it must be from outer space. And this, my lords, is quite unwarranted. I think it is worthwhile, once again, I know it's been done once or twice this evening already, but it's part of my argument, to consider the possibilities. And I would say that there are possibly two kinds of objects to be seen in the skies, those of terrestrial origin and those of extraterrestrial origin. And typical of the first kind, as has been said, are man-made flying machines, satellites, rockets, and the like. And identifiable objects of the second kind are meteorites and phenomena like the Northern Lights. My lords, I'm sure that many, and perhaps most, of the sightings recorded and reported are terrestrial in origin. Aeroplanes with navigation lights glowing at night, satellite launching rockets burning up on re-entry, remotely piloted vehicles, now beginning to be called RPVs, up on trial flights, weather balloons, tricked reflections of light. In the extraterrestrial class, I'm afraid I can't think of more, but of anything but meteorites, northern lights, and ball lightning, but there probably are other well-known physical phenomena in the knowledge of astronomers and meteorologists. I feel, however, that some of the reports we have had, and we can for the time being leave out Ezekiel, are not readily explained in terms of any of the possibilities which I've mentioned. The New Zealand phenomena are worth a great deal more investigation than they've yet had. But so far, insofar as I've been able to understand what has been reported, they do not appear to be explicable in terms of any of the suggestions which I've so far made. And that seems to go for the quite extraordinarily widespread sightings recently in Italy, where people as reasonable as you and I, my lords, seem to have seen, hundreds of people seem to have seen, quite inexplicable things in the sky. And I think it would be worthwhile trying to explain them. And if there are people who know what they are, then they ought to tell us. The high probability, in my mind, is that they are terrestrial in origin. And the only extraterrestrial possibilities don't seem to be feasible because of the very eccentric paths which the objects which were seen, or the lights which were seen, seem to have taken. But if they are terrestrial phenomena, then we ought to be able to identify them. But, my lords, I believe that any dispassionate investigation, such as I understand the noble Earl Lord Clancarty would like to have, could not ignore the possibility of the phenomena having their origins outside the Earth and perhaps outside the solar system. Just as meteorites are chance material projectiles originating in the solar system, may there not be a random matter of a different character, perhaps a luminous but insubstantial character, that in certain circumstances becomes visible and attracted to our area? I certainly would prefer I certainly would be readier to accept, I think I should say, some explanation in terms of what I might call the astronomical phenomena than ships from outer space. It would, I suppose, be foolish to deny that possibility, but as an explanation of the phenomena, and I think Lord Gladwyn exposed this, it is surely a very long shot indeed. But, my lords, if indeed we are to conduct any dispassionate inquiry, and I think we should, we must listen to the proponents of what one might call the Star Trek view. It can be argued, not unreasonably, that we, in our humble way, are probing nearby solar space with our Venus and Jupiter and other vehicular probes. We have ventured onto the moon. Is it not presumptuous? The argument goes to suppose that elsewhere in space, creatures more advanced than us are probing into our space, probing with means now occasionally visible to us, using their own RPVs, controlled from stations light years away. This is something of what the noble Lord Kimberley was saying, and it is a possibility which we must be prepared to consider. It is a possibility, though not many of us, I feel, would call it a probability. But if we do have a study of UFOs, as the noble Earl desires, we could not exclude the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligences from our consideration. You'll remember, my lords, that this quotation has been made twice this evening and a dozen times outside this house in this connection. But there are, and it's worth repeating again, more things in heaven and earth, the ratio, as Hamlet said, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And heaven, my lords, has always offered us more possibilities than earth. And although I remain skeptical of intelligent invasion from outer space, I do recall the dictum of the late Mr. Sherlock Holmes when he was investigating that curious matter of the sign of 4. When you have eliminated the impossible, Watson, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. The desirability of getting rational and acceptable explanations for the odd phenomena which are being reported, even if, like some other paranormal phenomena, they are subjective, is not, in my opinion, merely, or should not be, merely to satisfy our curiosity. And here I'm coming from a rather different angle to something which was discussed in greater depth by the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Norwich. There is a social danger, in my view, in leaving people in ignorance of the origins of these phenomena. I've recently learned from a number of sources that there have grown up, in North America particularly, many groups and cults whose attitudes are based on beliefs that UFOs are influential outer spatial manifestations interested in this earth. In some cases, these groups are looking to outer space for man's salvation. And if this is right, it is rather disturbing. I find, too, that in this country, there are groups interested, other than purely scientifically, in the UFO phenomena. I had a letter, and I think other noble lords may have had the same letter, earlier this week from an ecumenical Christian group which believes, among other things, that UFOs menace the spiritual health of the nation, that they are anti-Christian, and that information exists about them which is being withheld. It seems to me, my lords, that this association of UFOs with mysticism and religion makes explanation of the true origins of the phenomena a matter of great importance and some urgency. The sooner each reported sighting or landing is satisfactorily explained, the better. It is no good just laughing them off or trying to. We must seek the truth and tell it. I remain sceptical, perhaps more sceptical than anyone who has spoken this evening except the noble Lord Trefgarne. I remain sceptical of the more bizarre extraterrestrial explanations. I remain more than sceptical, indeed incredulous, of what the noble Earl in his motion calls landings. But I support him wholeheartedly in his wish for serious inquiry. And I hope the government will take steps to put such an inquiry in hand. Finally, my lords, I come back to this matter of terminology. In his motion, the noble Earl calls for an intra-governmental study. The noble Lord Trefgarne, and I think the noble Lord Gladwyn, took this to be an inter-governmental study. But intra means within. And I was puzzled by the use of the prefix, but that's what it does mean, and presumably what the noble Earl meant. But why a study within government? I would support the idea of a government-supported open investigation by a carefully chosen group of scientists and technologists with some funds at their disposal. But a study within government would seem to smack of a secret probe, which would be no good at all. I have no objection to a House of Lords study group, but it could scarcely perform in a way that a public organisation supported, say, by the learned societies and engineering institutions could. It is something of that kind that I would like to see brought into being, under government or with government support. A group of dispassionate people with the power and the money and the staff on a modest scale to investigate. Perhaps in his reply later this evening to the debate, the noble Lord Shrewsbury, will comment on this suggestion.
Lords, first I must thank the noble Earl Lord Clancarty for this debate, the subject of which has long needed an airing, and although the noble Viscount Lord Oxfuird isn't in his seat, I nevertheless congratulate him on his speech. My lords, the UFO saga is deep and complex, and there are no known experts to keep us up to date with everything to do with it, including its mechanics. However, scientists throughout the world have been drawn into an ever-increasing discussion as to what UFOs are and where they come from, so far with little enough result except to wonder why the bounds of natural physics seem to be broken on all sides. Most Western governments say that UFOs do not exist, yet the French Minister of Defense, Mr. Robert Gallet, in February 1974, said that they do, that his government takes them seriously, and that they've been studied secretly by a special department for over 20 years. Indeed, France leads the world in UFO research. It follows up sightings with police teams, scientists, and scholars, and the Deuxième Bureau of the Army since 1950. Oddly, in that same year, a remarkable report came from Farmington, New Mexico, on March the 18th, when the inhabitants of that town were treated to a display of flying saucers that literally filled the sky above them. Every important American newspaper told the story. With few exceptions, the entire township of 5,000 people, including the mayor, newspapermen, and members of the highway patrol, breathlessly watched an air show to end them all, a fantastic air circus. Countless saucers performed aerial acrobatics at speeds over 1,000 miles an hour, showing incredible handling and acute control in split-second timing by their ability to avoid collisions. My lords, that was not a weather balloon convention. My lords, is it not curious that we of the 20th century, with a vast knowledge of science behind us, should be blind to further wonders in the skies above? Men throughout the world have been branded as mad or mistaken when they've reported having seen strange sights in the heavens. My lords, many men have seen these sights and have not been mistaken. Who are we to doubt their word? who are governments that dare to ridicule the honest? Not long ago, the Loch Ness Monster was regarded as a fable, but now our leading naturalist says that it, or they possibly, probably exist. Why then should unidentified flying objects be any harder to believe, especially as they've been seen far more frequently? My lords, of course they exist. Only a few weeks ago, a Palermo policeman photographed one, and 4 Italian Navy officers aboard a light patrol boat in the Adriatic in the early hours of a morning saw a 300 yards long, fiery craft rising from the sea and disappearing into the sky. Odd, strange, frightening, but apparently quite true. Indeed, my lords, why should these men of law enforcement and defence lie? Well, of course, they did not lie. Why should they? Especially as in this case, their sighting was backed up from men from a nearby radar station who saw it too. My lords, each year there are many sightings of UFOs throughout the world. Some of them are very close at hand, while others are not, but always the effect upon those who see them is one of concern. And yet this very point is ignored and ridiculed by most governments right around the globe. In the United Kingdom's case, my lords, those who report seeing UFOs are taken to be misinformed, misguided, and rather below par in intelligence. If this is so, why has some of my information on this subject been given to me by the Ministry of Technology? Why should this ministry waste its time gathering false information? Well, of course, my lords, it's not false information. It's data reported by civil and Air Force pilots, policemen, sailors, and members of the general public who have all had personal experience that has intrigued and or frightened them. My lords, what are UFOs? Well, I don't know, nor seemingly do some governments. But these machines do exist in one form or another, abstract or solid, and they do travel at stunning speeds which seem to defy proved natural physics. Let the United Kingdom be told by Her Majesty's government the real details on UFOs as far as they know them, for by continued silence the position only becomes worse. Only a few weeks ago, a UFO was seen near Kimberley in the Highlands, and a few acres of Ashdown forest were burnt by another one. Is it safe to go on ignoring these appearances? Who's to know where they come from? But come they have. If we accept then that UFOs exist, we must next wonder how they operate. Their motive power would be of huge help to our transport and industrial life, for they apparently fly without wings at varying speeds from dead slow to incredible ones, and even hover silently. My lords, this kind of information is above price, and therefore we as a country should make every effort to collect every scrap of information that we can. I therefore ask this government to make the study of UFOs respectable by setting up a bureau that can be approached by all and sundry without any red tape or opposition in an attempt to clear the air. Every sighting and landing must be thoroughly investigated by the bureau in cooperation with the police, Royal Air Force, radar people, and British-based UFO investigators. The noble Lord Straboge, who is to wind up this debate, is no doubt sympathetic to the reasons for these speeches, for it's become patently obvious to a great many people that this subject has got to the point when governmental explanations must be forthcoming. A greater measure of open government is long overdue, and bringing the UFO saga into the realm of respectability would be one way of achieving this in part. I suspect that the British government does have a department studying UFO sightings, for why else should they bother to go to such trouble to publicly debunk reported ones if they are of no interest to them? Quite apart from the fact that the government has not admitted to the existence of the UFOs, these machines are potentially dangerous. They give off blinding light, crippling rays, and sometimes beams that immobilize humans. They start forest fires, eradicate crops, and cause great distress to animals. If the British population was made aware of this, they could sometimes take precautions. UFOs have been with us for many generations, so is it not about time that we officially recognize their existence and treated reports as less of a hot potato than hitherto? And my lords, before the noble Earl, Lord Halsbury, takes me to task once again on the subject of sonic booms, I have one suggested answer to it, why these high-speed UFOs do not produce sonic booms. And it's thought that these craft can produce a near vacuum envelope around themselves, which in turn would allow them virtually unlimited speed, because they would thus be free of nearly all normal resistance, as they would be flying within it. Not being a scientist, I cannot enlarge upon this explanation, but I hope it's of some assistance to the noble Earl.
My lords, first I may add my congratulations to my noble friend Viscount Oxfuird for his brilliant maiden speech, and I hope we are going to hear him many times again, because it is quite obvious from what we've heard from him this evening, he is going to receive every possible encouragement to take part in many debates in the future. My main contribution to this debate is related to assure the noble Earl of Clancarty of any support I can give, and if we are going to have a study group in your lordship's house, I'll be glad to be a volunteer to take part whenever I have the opportunity. I also have to thank him, others, for initiating this debate and for the pleasure of having such a really refreshing subject to discuss in the midst of the present period of crises and strikes. Now, I think I'm the 10th person to speak in this debate. I've noticed so far that none of your lordships have actually reported a sighting. So here goes. I'm going to stick my neck out, open my big mouth, and trust I'm not going to put my foot in it. I saw one a little while ago. It was the 31st of December, about 8 p.m. All right, have a good laugh. It was Hogmanay. Right. And as up in Argyll, it was a New Year's Eve party, and somebody said there was something funny flying across the sky. Well, about 15 of us came out to have a look, including some children. They'd been on soft drinks anyway. And it was like a bright white ball with a touch of red, followed by a white cone. In fact, the whole object had the appearance of a small comet. It was heading eastwards and seemed rather low in the sky, passing over the hills between Loch Sween and Loch Fyne. The position from which we viewed it was outside the village of Tayvallic in Argyllshire. Handsomely note, I've carefully written down all the names of these places to be readable. And that's on the west coast of Scotland, about the same latitude as Glasgow. As the ball seemed to disappear into the distance, it seemed to divide itself into two parts. Now, it may have been a comet or a meteorite, but whatever it was, I would like to know what it really was, and it would have been very beneficial if there had been some sort of centre or something to which I could write or telephone to report such an incident. Now, no doubt setting up such an organisation would be an invitation to cranks, but for staffing such a centre, I would suggest that volunteers could readily be found from the ranks of the former Civil Defence Service and or the Royal Observer Corps. Now, the Royal Observer Corps still exists, but it has gone literally, if not metaphorically, underground, where it is preparing to report and advise on nuclear fallout in the case of war. But there are many who used to serve in it and who have not yet disappeared from the scene, who could make valuable use of their past experience in establishing centres in various districts throughout the country. And I do not suggest we start opening up the old observer posts in the countryside, but centres to receive and analyse any reported sightings from the public. And such people with a sense of responsibility could, with a little experience, sift the genuine reports from the false. Suggesting that such an organisation be set up, particularly at times like these, can naturally give rise to a protest about the waste of public money. But volunteers who might be willing to work for a few hours are quite prepared to do it for a very small remuneration, if any at all. Now, I have mentioned the Civil Defence Service, and I don't know whether or not I should say that I declare an interest, but I was a member of it during the 60s, and I was one of many who were bitterly disappointed when it had to go into abeyance. I recall particularly the comradeship and the sense that we were doing a useful job for the community. And for one, if I had the time and opportunity, I would enjoy volunteering for working in a UFO information centre, if that might be a suggestion for naming that kind of organisation. Now, I shall be interested to hear the summings up in this debate. For my own part, I can give no explanation as to why these phenomena should be concentrated particularly within the last 32 years, as was confirmed by the noble Earl of Clancarty, and these flying saucers in the year of 1947 when the phrase was coined. But I will just accentuate what has been said before, add that if they are man-made or if they are some astronomical feature, and providing there is no risk of any security breach, then the public have a right to know about them.
My Lords, in common with everybody else who's spoken, I'd like to thank the noble Earl Lord Clancarty for giving us an opportunity to have what one might call a scamper over the course and exchange views on this very interesting, controversial topic, and at the same time to congratulate the noble Viscount on his maiden speech, which was obviously a very well thought out and well assembled set of considerations, which augurs well for his future in your Lordship's house, where I know he's already very welcome. And at the risk of capping the noble Lord Gainford's stories, I'd like to tell your Lordships about some of the sightings that I have seen. I will order them in terms of my curriculum vitae, beginning at the age of 6, when I saw an angel. Now, I don't know whether it was the noble Lord Davies of Leek who mentioned angels, or whether it was Lord Trefgarne or the noble Earl Lord Kindersley. But it was perfectly true. There was my guardian angel sitting on the edge of my bed, and naturally, with the imagination of a child, I had clothed this presence in human form with a large pair of feathery wings. But this presence proceeded to rebuke me for initiating a practice which it said would get me into trouble if I persisted in it. And having remembered the rebuke all my life and acted upon it, I am not prepared to deny the reality of the presence that was there with me. And this should be a sufficient answer to the noble Earl, I see I put him to flight, who thinks that if scientists come across something that they can't explain, they're afflicted with a kind of vertigo. On the contrary, my lords, we welcome something we can't explain because it's a new phenomenon which, as it were, stretches our capacities and brings something out in us. The next item, if I may come forward a couple of years to year 2 of World War I was about 8 years old, and the next thing I sighted was Zeppelins. And I used to go out into the garden after dark at the house where we lived, and I came back and reported the number of Zeppelins that I'd seen. And of course, my lords, what I had seen was, in my interpretation of it, a Zeppelin. It was a large, illuminated, cigar-shaped object. In fact, what I was looking at was the lenticular shape, the perspective of a searchlight thrown onto a cloud base makes. And I was interpreting it as Zeppelins and telling my parents how many Zeppelins I'd seen that evening. The next one is sundogs, and this fits very closely in with what the noble Lord Davies of Leek was saying about Macbeth's dagger and the laser holographic reconstruction of things that really aren't there. What sort of an interpretation would somebody who'd never read about it or seen of it put upon a sundog? Now, my lords, most people haven't seen them or read about them, and I was fortunate enough to have read about them and know the explanation before I saw the first. When you look at a cloud, drops of water, you are looking at a diffuse reflection of the sun, but if instead of drops of water in the cloud, they're drops of ice, and if they're formed under meteorological conditions where all the facets of the crystals happen to be parallel as they fall through a rising stream so that they're remaining roughly stationary, the effect is that of a rather dilute mirror, if one can so describe it. And if the sun is up there, you see it actually reflected in this imaginary mirror down through a cloud, and one doesn't expect to see the sun, as it were, looking down in this direction. Still less does one expect to perceive it traveling along beside one. Furthermore, one's not accustomed to focusing one's eyes at infinity in this particular direction. The only times that it would be appropriate to do so would be if you were standing on top of a skyscraper, where the vanishing point would be down here instead of over there, and it makes you rather dizzy. And seeing a sky dog is a rather uncanny sort of phenomenon. You can't focus on it properly. It doesn't seem to be anywhere in particular. It's flying along beside you. And what sort of terms would a person who'd never seen it before, read about it, report it in? I think they would be rather bewildered. They might report it just as a child will report the vision of an angel as having human form and feathery wings. So it might easily be reported as anything they themselves have been reading about. I then come to the green flash. And here I'm now about 20 and a student, and there is a controversy in the pages of the Times and in the correspondence columns of Nature about the green flash. Now, what is that? Under certain rather rare atmospheric conditions, the last limb of the setting sun suddenly flashes brilliant emerald green. And when I was a student 50 years ago, this phenomenon was not really established. It was possible to have a controversy as to whether there was such a phenomenon. People wrote to the Times saying they had seen it. I remember one man who'd said he'd seen it sitting by the shores off Bombay. Now, my lords, it was eventually photographed during the International Geophysical Year some years ago, the IGY. But before that, I did see it myself, having read about it, in rather odd circumstances. I was bird watching to the far northwest of Scotland by a sea loch called Loch Glencool, by a little village called Drumbeg, where there's a cliff path, and on this cliff path is a bench for the convenience of people who want to sit down and admire the view. I was bird watching. Another traveller, visitor to the district, was seated on the bench when I sat down. And by the chance coincidence, we were both using the same pair of Henself binoculars. And we got talking about our binoculars. There was a spectacular sunset. And when the sun was very low and it was safe to look at it through binoculars, I said to the fellow traveller, let us see if we can see the green flash. So we turned our binoculars on the green flash, and my lords, it actually happened. This very rare meteorological phenomenon actually happened when I just announced to a fellow bird watcher that let's have a look at it and see if it happens. Now, what would that person have made of this? if I had not been there just by chance to tell them what it was about, the green flash. And lastly, my lords, ball lightning. Now, I've never seen ball lightning, but the description one reads of ball lightning is so coherent, so similar in all cases, that one must, I think, accept it as a phenomenon which occurs regularly in nature, though we can't reproduce it in nature, and attempts to reproduce it in the laboratory are, to my mind, unconvincing. There's no theory of it. It appears to take the form of a football-shaped mass of glowing gas, which hops around, or if it gets a chance, gets onto a conductor like the rail in the gallery up there, and migrates along the conductor until it finally disappears with a bang. There is no theory of it. It's never been satisfactorily photographed, to my knowledge. If it has been, then I think the photograph must be a fairly recent one. And as I say, it's not been reproduced. But this again should ensure the noble Earl Lord Kimberley that faced with an unknown phenomenon which I can't explain, I don't get vertigo. I would be delighted to go ball lightning watching, as indeed I go bird watching. Now, my lords, science deal.
Has noble Lord ever seen a mirage?
Oh yes,
because that's easily explicable, but
one can reproduce a mirage in the laboratory. You have a long tray of sand with Bunsen burners underneath it, and you look at it from one end. It's quite a reproducible sort of phenomenon. Well, my lords, science deals with the material, with material objects, things like atoms and molecules, material processes, things like the emission and absorption of radiation, and material forces, such as the force fields, which couple the objects to the processes. And if things aren't material, then science really has nothing to say. If you want to know what consciousness, the consciousness of a mind is, I don't think science can either answer the question on the one hand, or say whether it's a proper question on the other hand. I therefore can only deal from the scientific point of view with the assumption that these are material objects. And if they are material objects, if they travel at the sort of speeds that are alleged, then why do they not make supersonic bangs when traveling above Mach 1? Now, noble Lord Davies of Leek made this point, noble Lord Rankeillour made this point, and I'd like to go into it in a little more depth, because we customarily express the speeds of fast-moving objects in terms of Mach numbers. And Mach 1 is the speed of sound appropriate to the temperature and pressure where the sound is being propagated. In terms of miles an hour, it's not a constant figure. But the advantage of using it as a parameter is this, that no matter what the temperature and pressure may be, Mach 1 is the speed at which the kinetic energy of a moving object, that is the power to pack a punch, is equal to its thermal energy. And this is an unstable condition. The least disturbance to these unstable conditions entails the conversion of kinetic energy into thermal energy with a bang. And this is what's called a shock wave, my lord. If you take a cross-section through a shock wave, there's a rise in pressure, there's a rise in temperature, there's a rise in entropy, there's a complete discontinuity. And that must happen when a material object is moving at Mach 1 or above through any medium. And the answer to noble Lord Rankeillour, I haven't had very long to think it out. He sprung it on me as a little bit of a surprise. But if you, as it were to create a vacuum, what happens to the air you've displaced? Are you going to sort of pull it in front and push it out behind? Because if that's your means of traveling through the medium, then you're merely moving some air backwards with the speed of sound, and it would create a supersonic bang just the same. Customarily, we hear two bangs very often, because there's a bow wave and a stern wave from the moving object. Sometimes the bang degenerates into a rumble, as a thunderclap degenerates into a rumble, and if any of your lordships who've been uncomfortably close to a lightning bolt are aware that it makes a very pronounced bang as the spark flies through the air. if these are material objects, and if they're moving at the speeds alleged, then I cannot see them doing other than making a bang. So either they're not material objects or they're not moving at the speeds alleged, in which case the speeds are some kind of optical effect, optical illusion. And this, of course, throws doubt upon the rest of the reports that we receive upon them. Now, the New Zealand report, in this week's New Scientist published today, we have a report from New Zealand, which I would like to read your lordships a little of. It's only a short report. Classic conditions for false reflections of radar beams, and this tunes in very much to what the noble Lord Trefgarne was saying. For classic conditions for false reflections of radar beams existed in the atmosphere over New Zealand on the nights that the UFOs were spotted at the end of December. Christchurch meteorologist Dr. Neil Cherry has reported. UFOs were both spotted on radar and seen by an airline pilot, and a brilliant light was subsequently filmed by an airborne TV crew. Of course, my lords, there is nothing in that to say whether the optical sightings and the radar sightings came from the same point or on the same alignment or at the same time. But we should just have to wait until the details of this become more available. I was much impressed with everything that my right reverend friend, the Bishop of Norwich, had to say on this matter, and some of the things that the noble Lord Davies of Leek said too. I don't think that anybody who reads the C.S. Lewis trilogy of space fiction, Out of the Silent Planet, Perilandra, and That Hideous Strength, will ever have his faith disturbed by doing so, because C.S. Lewis, who was a profoundly Christian apologist, wrote the most marvelous space fiction of a complex universe in which some of the created species were tempted and fallen like ourselves, others tempted and unfallen, others untempted, and they all had to live together in the same universe. I have always myself regarded the deeps of space and the immense time that it would take to travel from one inhabited world to another as being a kind of divine quarantine to prevent created beings interfering with one another's cultures until they're civilized enough and mature enough to have reached the point where they don't any longer want to do so. Too much of our science fiction is taping up by supposing that vastly superior beings to ourselves are motivated by the same rather unworthy commercial motives as we are. Running coal mines, they want to steal our coal mines or our water, or set up imperialisms. The little bit of fiction that I've always enjoyed most, and I must come to the end of what I'm saying now, concerned a flying saucer that was hovering slowly in a circle round Central Park in New York, and all the security forces turned out in order to do something about it. And as it went round, it became more and more clear that it was going round in a spiral, not a circle. And as the spiral grew smaller, the flying saucer grew smaller, until it was very little more than the size of a waistcoat button going round the head of a maiden in New York Central Park. And all the security forces converged on her because it was clear from the expression on her face that she was receiving a message at which she smiled. And so finally, the waistcoat button fell onto the path and was picked up and proved to be a waistcoat button. The security forces converged on the maiden and bullied her into telling them, but she didn't want to, what the flying saucer had told her. And she said, "I don't want to because it'll spoil it all." And they said, "Never mind, it may be very important for the security of the United States." And she said, "Well, all it said was, don't be unhappy, you're not the only lonely object in the universe." And, my lords, I think that's a much more comforting thought to approach the subject of flying saucers with than to suppose they're engaged on some kind of imperialism. Personally, I've always believed, with the noble Lord Davies of Leek, in the Loch Ness Monster. He's not the only person to believe in it. He was anticipated by Keats. I'm quite sure that when the poet wrote those lines, "Thou still unravished bride of quietness," that he must have had the monster in mind. He didn't, of course, go into it in very much greater detail. He didn't tell us whether the monster was viviparous or oviparous. It may, of course, lay eggs, but if unravished, then infertile, and that is perhaps why there's only one of it. But I've always thought, my lords, that just as mother, when baking a cake, leaves a little of the dough over, in order that the children can make funny little men with raisins for tummy buttons and put them into ovens and bake them alongside the bread or the cake for the day, so possibly on the day of creation, a little of the divine creative power was left in reserve for the lesser cherubim and seraphim to use, and they were allowed to make funny little objects like the abominable snowman and the Loch Ness monster, and therefore, by the grace of God, since this is an orderly universe, a home was provided for everything, so the snows of Tibet were created for the benefit of the Yeti and Loch Ness for the monster.
My lords, I join other noble lords in congratulating the Viscount Oxford upon his maiden speech. But I run the terrible risk of being accused by the noble Lord Davies of Leek of being an anthropological arrogant specimen. I'm not quite sure what that means, and I'm not quite sure he knows what it means. But I'm prepared to stand by it. I'm only sorry to appear to be a veritable Daniel in a lion's den of UFO believers, and to spoil the fun, when I've no doubt that today's flights of, dare I say it, fancy, will command far more attention than our debate yesterday upon British industry, which scarcely made today's press at all. Well, more's the pity. There is a danger, of course, my lords, in terminology and in gross assumptions. Many peers have spoken as though UFOs are actually something, but of course we're precisely saying that if they are unidentified flying objects, we don't know what they are. So I quite agree. Let's dismiss this flying saucer equals UFO to start with. And let's try to take a slightly more scientific approach. I wouldn't dream of speaking in this debate had I not asked my very good friend and neighbour in the Cheshire village of Swettenham, Sir Bernard Lovell, Fellow of the Royal Society and Nuffield Professor of Radio Astronomy, to be good enough to brief me at Manchester University's Department of Radio Astronomy at Jodrell Bank, of which he is the director, and I went there 2 days ago. What I'm about to say to your lordships is based entirely upon that round-table meeting with Sir Bernard and the members of his senior staff at Jodrell Bank. My lords, of all the thousands of reports of sightings that have been made, whenever it has been possible to make an investigation, they've been found to be natural phenomena, or in some instances, I regret to say, pure myth. Over the United Kingdom, Jodrell Bank's radio telescope, the first and still one of the most powerful in the world, has observed thousands of possible subjects for identification as UFOs. But not a single one has proved other than natural phenomena. And I'd ask the noble Earl, the Earl Kimberley, to take the point on board. If UFOs, as he suggested, defy human knowledge, how do we really know? How do we really know by what possible means or what possible background they are even to exist at all? Let's get matters into perspective, my lords, I beg you. At least 10,000 pieces of broken-up rockets of American and Russian origin are known to exist in space, and maybe there are many thousands more. And occasionally they do plough back into the atmosphere and burn up. Those must account, I think you would agree, for at least some of the so-called sightings of UFOs. Nature does provide fireballs, yes, meteorites, which bombard the Earth at a rate of 0.5 ton a day. Just take a tiny country like Holland. 100 rocks, the size of your fist, come through the atmosphere and hit that country in 1 year. Consider Holland in relation to the size of the whole of the world's surface, And you must surely realize that we are under constant bombardment, but not of UFOs, my friends, but of meteorites. A detailed study on the Canadian prairies has displayed how great is this bombardment, which I have just described over a wide area. Even more staggering, my lords, is the fact that it is estimated that 8,000 million pieces of stone and metal come to Earth annually, many of those burning up on arrival and give cause for these reports of unidentified flying objects. What is noticeable, my lords, is the close correlation between the position of the planet Venus and the reports of UFOs. For when Venus is low and bright in the sky, and when it is shining through a thick mist or thin cloud, it does much more resemble something other than our next-door planet of the solar system. Why, indeed, we're told, even the great President Carter has spotted one. But it's a pity we didn't read the rest of the subsequent report. It was later discovered that that was Venus precisely in those conditions I have described. Well, my lords, if the great President of the United States can be wrong, it's just possible that the few lords remaining in this house tonight might be too. Let's face it, we all would love to escape from the miseries and frustrations of our world, and particularly in these recent past days. By all means, go and see Star Wars or Jaws or any other myth. But don't, my lords, confuse that with very serious scientific study. That's carrying romance a little too far, and we must make sure that we don't make your lordship's house a laughing stock by doing so. One of the most advanced experimental stations at Jodrell Bank, and just take these statistics on board, please, my lords, has been on watch 24 hours a day for 30 years. Don't you think it reasonable for me to suggest that if there were UFOs, at least one claim would have been made? But every single thing that has been seen and observed by radio astronomy has been identifiable as a natural phenomenon and is occurring from the universe itself as we know it. I don't say from the solar system, I say from our universe. If there was something in it, and the noble Earl Halsbury is so right, of course the scientists would have been delighted to come forward with an announcement to that effect. After all, it was Jodrell Bank that managed to locate the Sputnik when the Russians, who so cleverly launched it, lost track of it in the atmosphere. So, my lords, think not that this is some denigrating comment by the scientific lobby, some nasty, cheap debunking exercise. No, my lords, but we've got to take a serious scientific view of the actual surveys and what has been discovered. I give way.
I know that it's near my own home at the moment, but I do beg the noble lord to remember there are other scientists too who say that, of course we know they're meteorites, and they've been from the whole of time, but there are some factors outside the range of that that justifies, and this is all we ask, an attempt of identification. There's no difficulty in identifying meteorites. We're not asking for that. We're asking for the other type of phenomena.
My lord, that promptly begs the question, is precisely what I'm saying, that the identifications that have been made are not necessarily of individual meteorites, or they are of demic portions of rockets and so forth, but there has been in 30 years study, 24 hours a day, constant watch, not a single sighting of any description which could possibly or remotely be considered worthy of serious study as a UFO. Every single thing has been explicable. And therefore, I think with all respect, it's no use saying, well, that's not a convenient answer. You've got to find some things that are not explicable. But I'm surely telling you, and I think it's perfectly fair, that you may say scientists, my lord, scientists. I am only quoting from one of the leading world, probably the leading world radio astronomer, and frankly, scientists can be anything from a BSc London University passed yesterday. I'm talking of 30 years' experience of radio astronomy and a professorship of the highest standing and order in the whole world. Both the United States and the Soviet Union come to Sir Bernard and to Jodrell Bank for assistance. Quite all right.
Nobody's denigrating what the noble lord is saying, but he's offbeat here. All we are saying, there are some of these phenomena that need investigation. That's all.
If the noble lord could show me just one phenomenon which requires, pardon me, I've given way a good number of times, let me even finish the sentence. Just one phenomenon. I am saying Jodrell Bank, which covers the whole of the United Kingdom, has been on watch for 30 years. It is probably the most powerful radio telescope in the world. Now, if they have found nothing whatsoever to report in a positive way, I'm, with great respect to Lord Davies of Leek, throwing at me, some scientists think that isn't good enough, my lord. No, we must not. You must give way to the argument, I fear. No matter. I will give way to the old Kimberley. I knew I was going to get a rough time, my lord.
Would the noble lord not think it inconceivable that just because Jodrell Bank says there are not UFOs, that perhaps that is what it has been told to say?
I certainly think it inconceivable. Absolutely and completely inconceivable. I have known this scientist personally for more than 30 years. I wouldn't dream of going along for a briefing, so to speak, on the estimation that he was to con me or that I'm some tool of the CIA to come and kid your lordships. Please, 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 don't let's carry this fantasy too far. I will deal, if I may, with one or two of the other aspects of the noble Earl's speech, and then you'll see some correlation to the whole of my argument. Let's turn to the defence interests of Pentagon and other Western defence establishments. When they've been challenged, they've refused to say UFOs don't exist. Nor have they said UFOs do exist. They are not committed. Now, my lords, we're all men of the world, and there are advantages, frankly, in making an international overestimate of the possible potential strength of one's maybe enemy, his ability to combat you in sectors in which you cannot adequately reply. And I think it would be most unwise of any defence establishment to make a categorical denial of UFOs, and equally foolish of me to do so. For I am not trying to prove the existence of nothing, or that something does not exist. What I'm saying is, on the scientific evidence so far, and I can only deal in detail with the United Kingdom, there is no evidence whatsoever from the greatest radio telescope of a single UFO. I think that the attitude of defence establishments were wide, even including the Soviet Union. They're probably wise. They must display the antithesis of overconfidence and complacency, lest there should, perchance, be some new arm of warfare that they haven't adequately explored or even entered. Particularly did this attitude apply in the first decade after the Second World War, when, frankly, the start of the Cold War and the intense fear of the Soviet Union's possible aggression against the West, when we were the sole possessors of atomic weapons, must have provoked such a degree of intense interest in the possibility of a new arm of warfare. Now, my lords, I'm sorry the Right Reverend Prelate is not here, but I'm glad, certainly, that Lord Trefgarne is on the front bench. I quote from Sir Bernard: "Whether we are the only people in the universe is entirely another matter. That is a subject of very serious importance and is being investigated. But I beg you, my lords, there is no direct connection between the possibility of other persons occupying other bodies, either outside the solar, within or outside our own solar system. But one thing is quite clear. There is an infinitesimal chance that there exists some other people who could be within our time frame, and I refer, of course, to the statements made by the noble Lord Gladwyn and the Earl Halsbury, within our time frame, to be able to spend perhaps tens or hundreds of light years to get here, and to have survived, assuming there's some sort of humanity, in those atrocious conditions, again, assuming it's some form of flying saucer, whatever our friends proclaim it is, to have survived that length of time and come into our own Earth's atmosphere. How could they possibly meet us in those circumstances? Or even let's take the millions against one possibility they could. Do your lordships mean to tell me that they could get so close to us as to be sighted, but be incapable of any form of communication or identification whatsoever? No, my lords, I'm sorry. I've listened most carefully to everything that has been said. The noble Earls Clancarty and Kimberley have claimed sightings from times before Christ, through the Middle Ages, and to the present day. Now, my lords, those noble Earls know full well that the amount of scientific knowledge in the Middle Ages, and particularly before the times of Christ, simply does not allow of it being a tenable theory that they had that degree of knowledge to be able to understand many of the phenomena that we know today. Indeed, the last 100 years, the last 50, the last 30 years, has made a dramatic change in the sum total of knowledge in this field. This is why, no doubt, Jodrell Bank can proclaim that they have had no sightings of any description which are not perfectly explicable as natural phenomena within our own universe. My lords, I'm sorry. The existence of USOs is even more fanciful than Gilbert and Sullivan's Iolanthe. Charming indeed, but I'm afraid a joke upon your lordship's house. I'm afraid some of my noble friends must join the flat earthers who will make the best playmates for this particular lobby. My lords, we have a duty to the country, and it is to explode the myth. We've been carried away tonight in realms of fascination and delight. It's got precious little to do with the facts. The myth, I suggest, my lords, has to be exploded. And we've got to get back to work in this dreary old world and the difficulties we're in. But I beg your lordship's house, the noble minister is to reply, for heaven's sake, no more government departments or inquiries. That alone we should be spared as a result of this excellent debate.
My lords, with apologies, I hope the noble Earl Lord Clancarty will not be cast down by the speech to which he has just listened. I myself must confess that I know remarkably little about unidentified flying objects. I know a few things about them. I do know quite a bit, and I've learnt more since the beginning of this debate about attitudes towards them. And they are almost as interesting to me in some ways. There's one thing, one class of person, one type of attitude towards them that I view with respect, and that is the attitude represented by people who call themselves, or perhaps, to be fair, are called by others as ufologists. I don't know whether the noble Earl himself would accept that word. I rather hope he wouldn't. I admit the charm and the satisfaction and the neatness of UFO as a, this is the word noble Lord Davies of Leek is so good at, acronym, is that right? Coming from unidentified flying object. But it does unfortunately lead to a word which to disrespectful persons, and there are some about, might be suspected as originating somewhere between, I'm afraid, illiteracy and the purely silly, rather as though a keen student of the affairs of the United Nations should describe himself as a eunologist, and his interest eunology. And that would have been very severely distressing to my late lamented friend, Lord Collisford, and indeed to me. If there is an agency set up for the correlation, collecting correlation of information, as I hope there will be, it could, I suppose, be called UFO-Info, which would have a certain elfin charm. But my lords, I am admittedly being absurd, and I'm doing it on purpose, but I'm doing it for defensive reasons, and I hope the noble Earl will not think that I'm being offensive. I'm not. I hope that they will, in some way, somebody will think of a better word. There is, in fact, a Greek word, teras, meaning a portent in the sense of a marvel or a wonder, which would generate quite nicely a teratologist or teratology. In fact, I'm not at all sure that teratology isn't already in the dictionary as the study of monsters. But it's not a word that's very widely used. It's not on everyone's lips very often, I think, and it wouldn't really matter if it were taken over to refer to portents. There is indeed a precedent for this kind of thing in television, because television, as noble lords will know, originally meant, before it meant what it does mean now, in the familiar sense that we understand it, it meant clairvoyance. And nobody finds any confusion now. However, whatever it may be known as, let us proceed, not waste time. My lords, I must make a remark. Nobody has done so far, I suspect, rather to his surprise, about the speech of my noble friend Lord Trefgarne. And if he had been speaking as a private backbencher, I would probably have not said anything, but he was speaking from the dispatch box. And therefore he represents, presumably, the views of the party to which I belong. And it is a fact. I wish to disown these views entirely, because I think that if a party of any magnitude cannot produce better views than that on a serious subject, I confess that I am ashamed of it. If this represents all that the Conservative Party can produce in the way of thinking on what is undoubtedly a serious subject, whatever your opinion about it may be, then I think this is deplorable. And if the noble lord really thinks that there is no serious interest or belief taken nowadays in witchcraft, I don't know whether perhaps he doesn't read the right newspapers, but I can assure him that this is far from true. He is not a believer in unidentified flying objects. I am no believer in UFOs, he said. Well, I don't know how you can not believe in UFOs. You can't take it for granted, if your mind has taken a leap ahead, that by an unidentified flying object, something is intended that is supposed to have originated in outer space, and say you don't believe in that. But say you don't believe in an unidentified flying object. I don't know what it implies. You don't believe in the object. You don't believe that it's flying. You don't believe it's unidentified. What? Because there are things that are unidentified. Perhaps they're not flying. If we do know what they mean, I don't think it's reasonable to say they don't exist. Nobody, except my noble friend Lord Hewlett, has seriously contended that they don't exist. The question is, what are they?
Well, Lord, I wonder if the noble Lord will allow it. Devine, he was fairly caustic about what I had to say. No, I don't deny the existence of unidentified flying objects, indeed not. I simply say that the most of them are indeed identifiable. Some of them aren't objects at all. They're simply a trick of the light or a meteorological phenomenon. I think that's certainly the case in many cases. But I agree, one cannot deny the existence of unidentified flying objects. It's simply a question of how we identify them.
I take the noble lord's point, of course I do. He also referred to unexplained sightings, as, or said, I think, I didn't wish to misquote him in any way, that ufologists, it's difficult even for me not to use this word, refer to unexplained sightings, which would in fact be explained if only we had better evidence. This, I think, is the gist of my noble friend's argument anyway. If we had better evidence, then we should be able to explain these sightings. This is precisely the sole point on which the noble Earl initiated this debate. This is what he is asking for, is he not? He wishes for evidence to be collected, collated, examined, evaluated, reported on as to what these things are. And it is notable, I think, that he himself did not say what he thought they were. Other noble lords have gone on speaking as though he had said they were fairies, or apports, or I don't know what. I don't think he said any such thing. I think he is perhaps our leading authority on these matters. At any rate, he's studied them more closely than anybody that I've heard of, and he must have exercised very great restraint in this matter, and I think he is to be congratulated on that, as well as on initiating the whole debate. I once had, in fact I have him still in a sense, an ancestor, that is to say he's still my ancestor even though he's dead, called Robert Boyle, who was founded a society called the Royal Society. And I think that if he should come back into the rooms of that enormously prestigious society now and find that it contained persons of the erudition and the charm of such fellows of the present Royal Society as the noble Earl Lord Halsbury, I feel he would feel entirely at home. A man of the most agreeable and, shall I say, totally non-sceptical nature, even if he did write a book called The Sceptical Chemist. Here we have a scientist, and my lord said, I think the noble Earl has done us a service by portraying, or displaying before our very eyes, the scientist, philosopher, who knows precisely the limits of science and makes no effort to go beyond them, nor does he point the finger of scorn at anyone else. For one thing he must know, as others know, that it is impossible to prove anything by negative evidence. If you wish to prove that something is not so, you can do it only in logic by proving the existence of something that is so, but makes that first premise impossible. Therefore, you cannot prove that any particular type of flying object does not exist. And with due respect to my noble friend, the fact that Jodrell Bank telescope has not seen something not only does not prove, but is not even particularly good evidence that wasn't there. I'm prepared to accept, if told, that the Jodrell Bank telescope has been operating on a frequency suited to the observation of UFOs of one kind or another for the last 30 years, but until I am told that, I shall be sceptical myself in that matter. I think it's unlikely. But even if it is true, and nothing has been seen,
If I may, my lord, please, could I just be quite clear? I did not say other than that Jodrell Bank had made many thousands of sightings, but had been able adequately to explain them away as natural phenomena from our own universe.
I thought I had my noble friend right. In other words, it has not seen anything that was inexplicable. But I don't think that this really is argument, that something does not exist. The question is, what sort of thing can it be? Now, how is it possible? I hope my noble friend will not think I'm going on about him. I'm not anymore. To maintain more than a certain degree of doubt in 1979. I remember, and other noble lords, of whom there may be one or two present in this chamber, will remember my predecessor who sat in this house. He was born in the year 1873, I think. No, not as early as that. 1886. And when he was born, there were no motor bicycles, no gramophones, fountain pens, safety razors, no electric trains. Messrs. Daimler and Benz in Germany were just putting the first petrol-driven car onto the roads, and Einstein, I think, was 8 years old. My noble and gallant relative, when he finally left the active list of the Navy, at a very advanced age, certainly, had lived into the age of the nuclear submarine, having started his first seagoing voyage in sail. Now, that was the span of progress represented technologically in the lifetime of one serving naval officer. What would he have said if he'd been told now that in my lifetime, and I'm not even all that near to the end of it either, I should have seen men on the moon, have seen the computer technology carried to the pitch that it has reached. That there would have been, quite a long time ago now, 50 years ago now, the sudden outbreak of wisdom following Einstein, of men like Schrödinger, Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, and so on, and the astonishing descent of knowledge into the subatomic world. This has all happened in the lifetime of many of us. And yet we can sit here, some of us, and say that marvels that are being postulated by some, and which are indeed less in magnitude than most of those would have been, to my uncle are impossible. We're not all saying that. In fact, perhaps nobody is saying it. But the argument is quite untenable. And I myself have no wish to say that, to express any view on what a UFO may be. What I do wish to say is that there is no knowing what it is not. It may be a product of some kind of psi faculty, as the noble Earl Lord Kimberley has said. It may be a mechanical marvel. It may be purely terrestrial. I doubt if it's angels. But I do believe that for the clearing up of mystery, for the doing away with doubt, for even the eliminating of some of the dangers that may exist that the Right Reverend Prelate referred to, that some kind of an open inquiry ought to be set up. I think I'm rather inclined to agree with the noble Lord King's Norton, if I think I'm right in saying that it should probably not be an inter-governmental one. I think it should be something rather more open than that. But I think it ought to happen. If there is a group set up within this House, as has been suggested by the noble Earl himself, then I think that would be an excellent thing. I'm myself entirely in favour of it. In any case, let us get this thing cleared out and out into the open. And let us by all means take it seriously, because, my lords, this is a serious subject. Far too many people are taking it seriously for it not to be. Now, I will conclude only by voicing my most sincere congratulations to my noble friend who made his maiden speech this afternoon, which very impertinent for me to congratulate him on it, but may I say, without less impertinence, how much I enjoyed it. And I've not so far, I don't think, adequately, or perhaps not at all, said anything complimentary about the noble Earl who initiated the debate. I left this to the end on purpose, because I think it may not be entirely realized what a service he has done. This is the first such debate that has occurred in any society, such as this particular one. And this society, by which I mean this noble House of Parliament, is probably the only legislative assembly in the world in which it could happen. I hope it will have repercussions which will spread far beyond this chamber. What their outcome will be, I do not know, but I think that in initiating the ripples that I hope will spread all over the surface of the mill pond, he has done a most valuable service.
Lords, I'd like to join with the noble Earl, Lord Cork and Orrery, in saying how grateful we are to the noble Earl, Lord Clancarty, for initiating this debate on UFOs. The subject, of course, has been of considerable interest in this country, and I hope our discussions, which, as the noble Earl rightly said, has been the first that we've had in your Lordship's house, will help to increase public understanding. But before I reply in detail to the debate, and I think it's been a most interesting debate, I would like to join with my noble friend Lord Davies of Leek in congratulating the noble Lord, the Viscount of Oxfuird, for his maiden speech. We are very glad to hear from him, if I may say so, and I hope we shall hear from him again on many other occasions. I shall be referring to some of the detail later, but I would like just at this stage to offer him my warmest congratulations. My lords, there are undoubtedly many strange phenomena in the skies, and it can be readily accepted that most UFO reports are made by calm and responsible people. However, there are generally straightforward explanations to account for the phenomena, as I think Lord Trefgarne said, speaking for the opposition, and I must say I welcome his constructive speech. There is nothing to convince the government that there has ever been a single visit by an alien spacecraft, let alone the numbers of visits which the noble Earl, Lord Clancarty, claims are increasing all the time. My lords, as has been said today, we live in a huge universe. I find it as awe-inspiring as Pascal did the contemplation of infinite space. There are some 100,000 million stars in our galaxy alone, which it would take 100,000 years to cross at the speed of light. Beyond our own galaxy, the distances become even more daunting. A light year, as your lordships know, is about 6 million miles. The Andromeda galaxy is over 2 million light years away, and that is in our own local group of galaxies. There are, of course, other groups as well. The evidence suggests that there is no intelligent life on the other planets of our own solar system, as the noble Viscount said. There are, of course, different views about whether there might be life elsewhere in the universe, but certainly there is no serious positive evidence to show that there is. My lords, if there were an advanced civilization elsewhere in the universe, as my noble friend Lord Davies of Leek supposed, with the technology to traverse these colossal distances, there are many questions to be answered. What is the point of this alleged huge number of visits to our planet over 3 decades or more to no apparent purpose? There seem to be internal inconsistencies in the idea. To put it simply, if these alleged aliens prefer to keep out of the way, the number of reported sightings would surely only be a tiny portion of the actual UFO movements, which would run into many millions. If they do not prefer to pass unnoticed, we could surely expect unmistakable appearances. Now, my lords, why have they never tried to communicate with us? Why has there been no evidence on radio of attempts at communication? And would not such a large number of movements be picked up by our defense radar system? Why has not a single artifact been found? Assuming that each visit does not represent a journey from a distant star, where are these alien spacecraft supposed to be hiding? Now that the idea of such bases on the moon or on another planet in our solar system is barely tenable, ufologists have had to claim that the aliens are based in the depths of the sea or in a great hole in the earth, or even that they come from invisible universes and other space-time continua. Anyone who accepts the hypothesis of large numbers of alien visitations seems forced towards explanations that are ever more fantastic and incapable of either proof or disproof. My lords, as I have said, there really are many remarkable things to see in the sky, and most UFO reports relate to actual phenomena reported by sensible people. But, my lords, let us consider the phenomena themselves. The noble Lord Trefgarne mentioned some of these. Huge quantities of space debris enter our atmosphere and are often seen as meteors and fireballs. Bright planets and even the moon or stars have been reported as UFOs in unusual atmospheric conditions, as the noble Lord Hewlett said. There are tricks of light on cloud and particular cloud structures. There is Aurora Borealis, St. Elmo's fire, and ball lighting, referred to by the noble Earl Lord Halsbury, which has been known to drift along telephone or power lines. There are some 5,000 man-made objects in orbit, satellites and debris, some of which can be seen by the naked eye, some through binoculars. About 600 such man-made objects re-enter the atmosphere every year, as the noble Lord Hewlett reminded us. The quantity is far less than natural space debris, but, my lords, the phenomena can be astonishing. Last April, the Ministry of Defence received reports of a large piece of debris re-entering across the south of England. Most reports were factual, but one spoke of an oval thing with a white cockpit, which hovered for a while, then shot off at great speed. My lords, we cannot prove that this was not a UFO, but it occurred at the same time and place as known re-entry of debris. Many reports relate to aircraft seen in unusual conditions at unusual angles. One recent UFO was confidently reported on local radio. Again, my lords, we cannot prove that it was not a UFO, but we do know that an RAF Vulcan bomber on a low-flying mission passed the same spot at the same time and on the same course as the reported UFO. Aircraft lights have led to UFO reports, and distant aircraft with landing lights on. I've seen them myself. Flares from aircraft, short condensation trails lit by the sun after dusk, light reflected from aircraft. Other phenomena include meteorological balloons. The Meteorological Office alone releases 50 such balloons every day, which expand to 40 feet in diameter and rise to 100,000 feet, and can be lit by the sun after dark. Many other organizations, such as universities, use balloons, some much larger. Meteorological searchlights shine on clouds. The beam itself cannot be seen, only a point of light in the sky. There are hot air balloons and kites. Even birds have been reported as UFOs. Lights on distant towers, car headlights on distant hills, dust devils and airborne debris carried by the wind. My lords, all these phenomena can be misinterpreted by the most sensible observers, particularly when seen unexpectedly and briefly, and in unusual atmospheric conditions. This is what opponents of the natural explanations forget. With distortions of light and mirages, the most commonplace things can be so changed as to be barely recognizable. For example, my lords, I am told that the United States Air Force attributed the 1947 sighting by Arnold, described by the noble Earl, Lord Clancarty, to a mirage effect. Phenomena seen through glass are suspect. There are phenomena generated within the eyeball, and there are optical illusions, which the noble Earl Lord Halsbury referred to. One scientist, whose task includes watching satellites, describes how, when observing stars near moving clouds, he finds it difficult to escape the illusion that the stars are flying past stationary clouds. The noble Earl Lord Salisbury referred to the green flash. I used to see it myself in Alexandria when we were on leave. It was one of our evening pastimes to sit on the promenade and watch it go down over the sea. My lords, in 1968, the United States Air Force commissioned the University of Colorado to carry out an independent study into UFO phenomena. Their report, which was published in 1969, was very substantial and detailed, and it covered some 50 examples of such phenomena, but added that it was impossible and potentially misleading to try to tabulate all of the possible causes of UFO perception. There are simply too many. The report's main conclusion was, and I quote, "Nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge." The findings of this report were endorsed by a panel of the National Academy of Sciences. My lords, there really are tens of thousands of strange things to be seen. It is the custom to call such phenomena UFOs, and to transpose this easily into alien spacecraft. Often the appearance is too fleeting and the description too imprecise for a particular cause to be attributed. What we can say is that there is a great variety of plain explanations, There is no need, I suggest, for the far-fetched hypothesis of alien spacecraft. To genuine sightings, we must, however, add hallucinations, the excited tales of the gullible, and the embellishments of the born romantic. There are also indications that ufologists accept reports of UFOs somewhat uncritically. The noble Earl Lord Clancarty referred to a papyrus found among the papers of a Professor Tully recording flying saucers during the reign of Thutmose III. The Colorado report, which I mentioned earlier, inquired into this story. The alleged papyrus could not be traced, but internal evidence in the translation suggested a fake. Inquiries with the Vatican Museum also suggested that Tully, an amateur Egyptologist, had been taken in by a fake. There is a category of UFO cases difficult to explain because the description is too vague or the evidence too remote, coupled perhaps with a coincidence of different phenomena and with exceptional conditions. If one accepts that there are natural explanations that could account for most sightings, it is an enormous and irrational jump to claim that the residue of difficult cases constitute alien spacecraft when there is no positive evidence that they do constitute alien spacecraft. My lords, I should mention the famous UFO reported over the United Kingdom in December 1978 on New Year's Eve. In fact, this was one probably seen by the noble Lord Gainford, which he referred to in his speech. The phenomenon was probably the re-entry of a launcher associated with the Russian space satellite Cosmos 1068, launched on the 26th of December. Of over 100 reports reaching the Ministry of Defence, nearly all were factual and consistent with the re-entry of satellite debris. The recent sightings in New Zealand, referred to by the noble Lord King's Norton, attracted worldwide publicity, and we understand that the New Zealand government may make an announcement when the facts have been assembled and appraised. Preliminary advice from our High Commission in New Zealand shows confident expectation that the sightings will prove to be due to natural phenomena, as I think the noble Lord Trefgarne, the noble Earl Lord Halsbury implied. My lords, the noble Earl who initiated this debate referred to the attitude of other governments to UFOs. My lords, it is not for me to speak in this House for other governments. I have, however, already made mention of the United States study in 1968, and I understand that nothing has happened since that time to cause the United States authorities to change their views or to warrant further official investigations of UFOs. The noble Earl also referred to an interview with the then French Minister of Defense, Monsieur Robert Gallet, gave in 1974 on the subject of UFOs. The noble Earl suggested that Monsieur Gallet had said that UFOs were real, but that he, the minister, did not know where they came from. My lords, I've read the transcript of Monsieur Gallet's broadcast. I also took the trouble to check it back with the original French. My lords, the essence of what the minister said was that the phenomena were genuine and were reported by responsible people, but that there were aspects which were difficult to explain. Nowhere did the minister say that UFOs were real in the sense that they represent alien spacecraft, as suggested by the noble Lord Rankeillour. My lords, the noble Earl Lord Kimberley also said that these had been seen by astronauts. Now, these reports by astronauts were examined in the Colorado study. The astronauts were, of course, required to report everything unusual perceived on their missions, and indeed many strange phenomena were noted. All of the phenomena except three were explained. There was nothing at all to suggest that the unexplained sightings were alien spacecraft, and the limited visibility from the small and smeared windows of a spacecraft did not make visual observation easy. Now, my lords, it has been suggested in this debate that our government is involved in an alleged conspiracy of silence. My lords, I can assure your lordships that the government is not engaged in any such conspiracy. In view of what the noble Lord Gainford said, I must emphasize that the Ministry of Defence examines any UFO reports received to establish whether they reveal anything of defence interest, but nothing in the reports examined have ever given cause to believe that they represent alien spacecraft. My lords, there is nothing to have a conspiracy of silence about. What is more, a visitor from outer space would be one of the great events in history. I hesitate to say the greatest event of all, in the presence of my old friend, the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Norwich, whose moving speech we listened to with such interest. But it would certainly be an event of stupendous importance. My lords, as the noble Earl Lord Halsbury said, scientists are rightly inquisitive people. If there was anything in the stories of UFOs, we would expect the scientific community as a whole to be devoting much efforts to studying or to making contact with these supposed aliens. The idea of a conspiracy of silence by this and other governments belongs, my lords, I suggest, to the world of James Bond. Then the noble Lord Kimberley implied that there was some kind of cover-up. My lords, there is no cover-up and no security ban. It is true that when people ask to see the Ministry of Defence UFO files, they are told the papers must remain confidential. But there is a very mundane reason for that. The files contain voluminous correspondence from the general public. We cannot divulge the identity of the correspondence. It follows that the files must remain closed under the rules laid down in the Public Records Acts passed by Parliament, which at present preclude disclosures until 30 years have elapsed since the date of the particular correspondence. The earliest reports the Ministry of Defence hold are dated 1962. My lords, the noble Earl Lord Clancarty mentioned the possibility of an inter-governmental study on UFOs. At the United Nations recently, representatives of Grenada made statements about UFOs and proposals for a study. A compromise decision was taken wherein the General Assembly invited interested member states to coordinate research on a national level and to inform the Secretary-General of their findings. The Secretary-General was requested to transmit the Grenadan statements and other relevant reports to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. This is not an intergovernmental study in the sense that the noble Earl Lord Clancarty is seeking, but he may be content that Grenada and perhaps some other countries may be reporting in an international forum.
My lord, the word was intra, not inter.
Yes, well, I take note of what the noble lord said. My lords, then it has been suggested too in this debate that Her Majesty's government should set up a study group. I'm glad to say that the noble Lord Trefgarne and the noble Lord Gladwyn, both speaking from the front benches for the opposition parties, did not support this proposal. And certainly Her Majesty's government do not consider that there is any justification for the expenditure of public money on such a study. My lords, I repeat that I am grateful to the noble Earl Lord Clancarty for raising the subject of UFOs, and I am particularly grateful to him for informing me in advance of the points which he proposed to make to your lordships. However, from all I have said, I am sure that your lordships will agree that there is no reason for my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Defence, to make a broadcast interview about UFOs, as the noble Earl Lord Clancarty suggested. As for telling the public the truth about UFOs, the truth, my lords, is simple. There really are many strange phenomena in the sky, and these are invariably reported by rational people. But there is a wide range of natural explanations to account for such phenomena. My lords, there is nothing to suggest to Her Majesty's government that such phenomena are alien spacecraft.
My lords.
Question that I did get up to ask when the noble Lord Strabogie arose. I was going to ask it of the noble Earl Lord Halsbury, but I think it'd be more courteous to ask it of Lord Strabogie. The subject of this debate is objects, and in the excellent speech which I agreed with almost all of by Lord Halsbury, he mentioned that scientists, as scientists, are only dealing with material objects. I have to be careful here as a non-scientist who minds his P's and Q's, hardly knows a pulsar from a quasar or a quark. Is a black hole a material object?
My lords, I wouldn't like to follow the noble Viscount down that avenue at all. I don't think even scientists themselves or astronomers know what black holes are. I may say, I think it's a pity in a way that the noble Viscount didn't take part in the debate.
My lords, I would like to thank the noble Lord Strabogie for his assurances and the information he has given us. And I'm sorry that we're not going to be able to listen or see his right honourable friend, the Minister of Defence, giving a televised interview about UFOs. Now, there are just one or two very, very small points before I finish this off. We've talked about the umpteen light years some of these planets and stars are away from us. But we're looking at it, aren't we, from our own standpoint, because we only started to fly in 1903 when the Wright brothers took off. Now we've got Concorde, you see, and so we consider ourselves rather good. And we say that we can't go right out into space because of all this distance of the light years, but supposing there are, which has been suggested, billions of planets with civilizations thousands of years old. Is it not possible that they could come here after all that time almost instantaneously? It's just a thought. Now, apropos of that, I would like finally to bring to your attention a famous scientist and astronomer, our own Sir Fred Hoyle. Some years ago he wrote a book called Of Men and Galaxies. In that he wrote a passage which I was allowed to quote in one of mine. It read, "You are all familiar with an ordinary telephone directory. You want to speak to someone, you look up his number and you dial the appropriate code. My speculation," this is Sir Fred Hoyle speaking, "my speculation is that a similar situation exists and has existed for billions of years in the galaxy. My speculation is that an interchange of messages is going on a vast scale all the time, and that we are as unaware of it as a pygmy in the African forests is unaware of the radio messages that flash at the speed of light round the Earth. My guess is that there might be 1 million or more subscribers to the Galactic Directory. Our problem is to get our name into that directory. I think, my lords, you will agree that there is a man of vision. Nothing is impossible in this world or in this universe. It is just that the seemingly impossible takes a little time to come about.
Yeah.
Now, we've had an interesting discussion this evening, and I would like to thank the Right Reverend Prelate and all the noble lords who have taken part in this debate and for their wonderful contributions. And I would also like to congratulate Lord Oxford, he's not there at the moment, but he's back, Oxford, for his splendid maiden speech. And now, my lord, nothing remains for me, and also to thank all your other lordships for your rapt and riveted attention. I beg to withdraw the motion.
Is it your lordship's pleasure that this motion be withdrawn? The motion is by leave withdrawn.
My lords, I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
That the House do now adjourn.